Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the smoke-swirled drawing rooms of Victorian England, where the candles flicker a little too much, the wallpaper peels in just the wrong places, and the air is always suspiciously chilly, even in July. You've been invited to sit in a stiff-backed chair, elbows tucked, next to a woman who claims to speak to the dearly departed, and a man who insists he once saw his grandmother's ghost walk through a wardrobe. You're in good company. In the world you're about to step into, ghost hunting isn't some quirky fringe interest. It's an oddly fashionable pastime, wedged between a trip to the opera and a nice game of whist. People gathered in their parlors, not just for tea and tattle, but to peer into the afterlife, and they took it very seriously. Like take notes in complete darkness with trembling hands, serious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? I'll be reading the comments like a proper Victorian gossip. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking up the creaky stairs of a London townhouse. The floorboards groan with that particular Victorian melancholy, equal parts dampness and deeply held secrets. The hall smells faintly of coal dust, old velvet, and something floral that's trying too hard to mask decay. Lavender, probably. Always lavender. You're here not as a guest exactly, but as a participant. You've been invited to a séance, not by some rogue street-side fortune teller, but by a very respectable family, the sort that displays mourning brooches made from human hair and keeps a black veil at the ready, just in case. Ghost hunting in the Victorian age wasn't all spooky theatrics. It was born out of a very real crisis. Death was absolutely everywhere. Cholera, typhoid, childbirth, coal fires, and slippery staircases, you name it. Life expectancy hovered somewhere between "don't get too attached" and "have you written your will yet?" And when your world is that full of sudden endings, it's only natural to want a little posthumous reassurance. So the Victorians created it, or tried to. The room you enter is heavy with expectation. Velvet drapes block out the gaslit street outside. The fire is low, more for ambiance than warmth. A round table sits in the center, already surrounded by a curious collection of guests. A local doctor with mutton chops the size of hedgehogs. A widow clutching a brooch so tightly her knuckles are white, and a pale young woman with faraway eyes. Tonight's medium. The ghost hunter, the gentleman investigator, has his kit laid out neatly on a side table. Notebooks, pencil, a pocket watch, and oddly, a small bell. You try not to stare. He doesn't wear a cape. That's disappointing, but he does have spectacles, and the kind of facial hair that suggests he reads too many German journals. He nods at you gravely and says something about observational integrity. You nod back and pretend you didn't trip over the umbrella stand on the way in. The séance begins with a hush. You're instructed not to speak unless addressed by a spirit, not to cross your legs, and not to laugh, which is a challenge because someone just used the phrase psychic ectoplasmic discharge with a straight face. The medium exhales slowly. Her hands twitch once, twice, then settle. The room seems to tighten. Candles flicker with more drama than necessary. The air feels colder, or maybe you're just buying into the whole thing. Then it begins. A soft knock from under the table. Nobody moves. Another knock. Two this time. Then the table gives a polite wobble, like it's stretching its ghostly joints. And this is when the note-taking begins. You glance over at the investigator. He's not watching the table. He's scribbling furiously, head bowed, pencil gliding across the paper in the near dark. He isn't reacting to the knocking. He's cataloging it. This wasn't uncommon. Victorian ghost hunters saw themselves as pioneers of a strange frontier. They weren't just thrill seekers. They believed they were documenting real measurable phenomena, even if what they were documenting was a floating tambourine and the smell of pipe smoke appearing out of nowhere. They needed notes, contemporaneous, unsullied by memory, ideally taken in candlelight, while spirits rearranged the furniture. Historians still argue whether this urge to document was scientific rigor or performative seriousness, more about looking legitimate than actually proving anything. But that didn't stop them. You watch as the gentleman hunter nods once, gently rings his bell, and continues writing. He uses coded abbreviations, R2 equals sign double knock, LT equals sign light tap, MW equals sign medium wail. The notebook becomes a ledger of invisible things, and still you sit. In this dark, perfumed room full of held breath, ghostly sounds, and the occasional cough, one guest gasps as a breeze brushes her cheek. Another flinches when the medium moans and slumps backward. The investigator notes it all down. He even draws a little diagram of the table's position relative to the fireplace. Your candle flickers again, or does it? Victorian interiors weren't designed for clarity. The curtains are too thick, the carpet's too lush, and the furniture is always conspiring to bruise your shin. But the ghost hunter persists. In this gloom, his pencil scratches on, creating a paper trail through the supernatural. You begin to understand why they did it. With so much mystery in the air, so much grief, so much unspoken yearning, the notebook is a tether, a way to feel like someone, somewhere, is keeping track, that the weirdness might make sense someday, even if all it records is a suspiciously rhythmic knocking sound and a candlestick that refuses to stay still. You're still in the same room. Your eyes have adjusted to the dimness, though it feels more like your imagination compensating than any actual improvement in light. The fire has burned down to a soft glow, just enough to throw shadows that dance a little too enthusiastically on the ceiling. The air smells like old wax, burnt sugar, and faint anxiety. The medium, now silent and pale as a moonbeam, has returned to her upright posture. She doesn't remember slumping, she says. That's normal, the others murmur. Quite normal. You're less convinced, but you've barely had time to process before the next act of the evening begins. A séance within the séance. This one doesn't involve table tapping or ghostly breezes. It involves a glass of water, a piece of chalk, and a very earnest woman named Mrs. Penelope Hawkins, who insists that her great-aunt Mildred communicates best when one draws a chalk circle around the glass and sings a hymn in E-flat. You try not to giggle. You fail a little. The thing is, this is how it often went. The mid to late Victorian era was a time of enormous spiritual experimentation. Séances weren't just for fringe eccentrics. They were hosted by well-respected families, published in major papers, and attended by everyone from clergy to coroners. As spiritualism spread like hot jam on toast, the rituals became more elaborate, more codified, and let's face it, a bit more theatrical. You're watching a society play out its grief through rituals that straddle performance and belief. And you're also learning that most ghost encounters are surprisingly polite. No banshees, no headless horsemen, just the occasional knock, a sense of being watched, or in one memorable case from 1874, the scent of tobacco appearing in a nun's bedroom. She didn't smoke, The bishop was not pleased. Now the hymn begins. Off key, faltering, reverent. Mrs. Hawkins closes her eyes, her fingers resting on the edge of the chalk circle. Her lips move silently, perhaps inviting Great Aunt Mildred for a polite ghost visit. And again the notebook is out. The gentleman ghost hunter, let's call him Mr. Langley, because he absolutely looks like a Langley, is scribbling away with a serenity that borders on madness. No reaction to the hymn, no glances at the swaying medium, just notes, everything catalogued, time, temperature, mood of the room, and any auditory anomalies. Here's the thing about the Victorian fascination with the supernatural. It wasn't entirely about belief. It was also about documentation. There was an emerging obsession with categorizing experience, fueled by the rise of natural sciences, statistical charts, and encyclopedias fat enough to press flowers. Ghost hunting became a peculiar blend of spiritual yearning and Enlightenment-era data obsession. Historians still debate whether this blend was genuine belief in the afterlife or a clever coping mechanism dressed in scientific clothing. In this case, it's dressed in lace and waistcoats. You're handed a small notebook of your own, just in case you witness something. You're told to keep an open mind and a firm pencil grip. You nod, but your pencil is already slippery from the damp warmth of the room and a lingering unease you can't quite name. Your fellow séance goers have leaned into their roles. One elderly gentleman mutters about a chill coming in from the corner, though all the windows are shut. Another swears he saw the candle flame bend like a blade of grass in wind. You blink and try to see it too. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And then comes the rap. 3 sharp knocks from beneath the floorboards, or above, or maybe within the table itself. It's always hard to tell. Everyone freezes. Mrs. Hawkins stops mid-hymn. The medium lifts her chin as though listening to something far away. Mr. Langley's pencil scratches the page faster than ever. You catch a glimpse of what he's writing. 3 taps at 8:27 p.m., coinciding with hymn pause. Participants startled. Candle did not extinguish. You're weirdly impressed. This isn't just a diary. It's an attempt at precision, control, some kind of structure in an otherwise ridiculous situation. You start to wonder what those notes will become. Published findings, lecture fodder, evidence for the next séance, or just another dusty notebook on a shelf next to outdated star charts and a crumbling taxidermy owl. Still, you scribble your own observation. Rap sounded hollow, felt like under the table, possibly loose joint. You're already becoming one of them. And it's worth noting that the Victorians weren't the first to try this, nor would they be the last. But they were perhaps the most devoted to the ritual of it all, to the layers of rules and expectations. Sit in this arrangement. Use only this candle. Do not cross your arms. No sudden movements. Notes in the dark. Even now you realize the dimness is part of the script, a deliberate blurring of sensory input, not because it's more effective, necessarily, but because it's more charged, more dramatic. Your eyes can't confirm or deny anything. Your ears strain harder. Your brain fills in the blanks, and your pencil, like Mr. Langley's, keeps moving. The act of recording becomes something sacred. Did you hear a sigh just now? You're not sure, but you write it down anyway. That's how it spreads. These stories, these reports, not because they were undeniable, but because someone wrote them down before doubt could settle in. And somewhere in the growing shadow beside the fireplace, Mrs. Hawkins begins humming again. The séance is not over. Neither is the story. The table is quiet now. Too quiet, if you're being honest. It's the kind of quiet that makes you more aware of your own breathing than you'd like. Your ears buzz, not from noise, but from lack of it. Someone clears their throat gently, and you flinch. Normal. Mrs. Hawkins has stopped humming. She looks down at the chalk circle like it might whisper something back. It doesn't. The medium shifts in her seat, drawing her shawl tighter. You can't tell if she's cold or just leaning into the drama. You glance at Mr. Langley again. He hasn't stopped writing. Not once. His pencil is shorter now. He's chewed it a little. You suspect it's not nerves, but habit. He looks like the kind of man who cataloged his breakfast by texture and temperament. And this brings you to tonight's next curiosity, the strange vocabulary of Victorian séances. They had an entire ghost hunting dialect. Everything had a name. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of flame. Spirit rap, phantom draft, ectoplasmic extrusion. You sit there wondering who came up with phantom draft and whether they were wearing wool socks when they did. You lean in as another participant. A clergyman with spectacular eyebrows announces he feels a pressure on the nape. Not pain, not wind, pressure. The medium nods knowingly. Mr. Langley scribbles something that includes a curious abbreviation, NP at C. You'd laugh, but now you feel it too. Is your collar tighter? Is that a tingle down your neck? Or just your overactive imagination? Victorian ghost hunters were keenly aware of the body, not in the way modern scientists might take biometric readings, but in a much stranger way. They believed spiritual contact often started with the subtle physical, a breeze, a chill, a touch. The body became a sort of human barometer, always teetering on the edge of paranormal perception. Historians still argue whether this focus on the body was spiritual insight or just repressed Victorians being weird about touching things. But either way, they recorded it. Langley now flips his notebook over. The back pages, you notice, are filled with little sketches, floor plans of séance rooms, positions of participants, even the tilt of a candle. You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. You look down at your own page. Knee at me, unsure, collar itchy, close enough. The medium exhales loudly, then begins to mutter. The room shifts again, not literally, but emotionally. It's like everyone just pulled the blanket over their heads at the same time. She's channeling now, or attempting to. Her eyes roll back just enough to be unsettling, and she starts speaking in a soft voice, not her usual voice. This one is breathy, slow, and strangely posh. I am here. A pause. Everyone leans in. I am Mildred. Mrs. Hawkins gasps. Her teacup rattles. You write. Pause. Aunt Mildred returns. Voice elevated. No identifiable accent. And that's when the teacup moves. It doesn't fly or spin. It slides. About half an inch, maybe less. Just enough to make your heart leap. Everyone sees it. No one moves. Not even Langley, who to his credit writes it all down with the speed of a caffeinated librarian. The explanations come quickly, softly, like polite apologies. Condensation, table vibration, spirit affirmation. Take your pick. The ghost hunters never ignored the ordinary possibilities. In fact, they loved debating them. There are entire records, endless letters and journals, where two or more investigators argue for days over whether a tilting table was caused by spiritual energy or the vicar's foot. It's all very polite and all very exhausting, but that's the thing. They wrote everything down, not because it was all convincing, but because any one moment might be, any one tap or flicker might be the real deal. And if they didn't write it down, how would they ever know? You're beginning to understand why they did it in the dark, not just because it was spooky, but because it made things feel more possible. Shadows made the imagination bolder. Dimness equalized reality and suggestion. You feel something brush your ankle, just a tickle. Could be the hem of the tablecloth or a spirit rat. You do not check. Langley now stands and begins inspecting the room. Quietly, methodically, he carries a small hand mirror, which he uses to peer beneath the table without crouching. You suppress the urge to applaud. Nothing, he says. No visible apparatus. Translation. Nobody's pulling strings or using levers. At least, not tonight. The séance winds down. There's no dramatic ending, no final whisper or ghostly farewell, just a slow fading of the medium's strange voice, a few sleepy sighs, and the sound of someone's knee cracking as they stand. The fire has nearly died. The candles gutter low. Langley closes his notebook. He sighs, not disappointed, but satisfied. He's filled 10 pages, all observations, all events, all noted before memory could get fuzzy. It's oddly admirable. You stretch your legs, which tingle like pins and needles. You realize you've been sitting for over 2 hours in near darkness, watching strangers believe, watching them hope, honestly, watching them record every flicker of that hope, like it might prove something someday. You wonder how many notebooks like Langley's exist, tucked in attics, lining shelves in dusty libraries, full of knocks and sighs and diagrams of teacups that moved slightly left. You glance one more time at the medium. She's drinking tea now, like none of that just happened. Mrs. Hawkins is beaming. The clergyman still looks troubled, but in a satisfied way. And Langley, he's already dating his notes and drawing up a tidy chart. The séance might be over, but the record remains. And so does the darkness. You'd think the séance would be the end of it. After the candle stubs have been snuffed out, after the teacups have been drained of their lukewarm brew, after the chairs are pushed back and the room sighs with post-séance exhaustion, you'd assume everyone would just go home, maybe slightly embarrassed, and that would be that. But no, you follow Langley into a side room, an office maybe, or a study, and discover the real heart of Victorian ghost hunting. Paper. Stacks and stacks of paper. His handwriting alone could keep several monks employed. He begins to transcribe the notes he made during the séance into a more formal journal, using a fountain pen so slow and deliberate, you want to shake him. He uses blotting paper. He uses italics. He writes like he expects future archaeologists to decode it after an alien invasion. And it's not just Langley. Across the city, across the empire even, ghost hunters were doing the same thing. Notebooks filled in real time were merely the rough drafts. The final records, now those were masterpieces. They included full participant lists, room layouts, mood descriptions, lists of observed phenomena, and occasionally even weather conditions. Because, naturally, a sudden wind from the east might excite the dead. Historians still puzzle over whether this obsessive record-keeping was genuine research or an elaborate form of spiritual fan fiction. But to the Victorians, it mattered deeply. You glance over Langley's shoulder as he writes. He's labeling every tap, every movement, even every silence, period of absolute stillness. There's an almost romantic dedication to it, like he's trying to catch something invisible with nothing but graphite and faith. And then he does something interesting. He pauses, looks up from his notes, and adjusts the lamp. Then, without warning, he switches it off, and he continues writing in the dark. You wait a beat, unsure if this is an affectation or a test, maybe both. But no, Langley mutters, almost to himself, notes taken in full light risk interference. Memory reinterprets under glare. In other words, the darkness isn't just for the ghosts, it's for the note taker too. And this, you realize, was a genuine belief among certain ghost hunters that sensory subtlety thrived in the dark. That bright light created doubt, imposed modern skepticism, even filtered out the etheric impressions left by spirits. So the best notes, the truest notes, were captured in gloom. No reflection, no correction, just raw, immediate scribbling. There's something both noble and completely unhinged about it. You try it. You flip to a blank page in your own notebook and begin to write, using only the faint outline of the window and the red embers in the fireplace to guide you. Your handwriting looks like a spider fell asleep mid-sprint, but still you write, and you begin to appreciate how the act of taking notes in the dark changes your experience. It's more tactile, less precise, more emotionally tuned. You're not just recording facts, you're recording feelings. Langley finishes his page and blows gently on the ink. He smiles faintly. The dark encourages honesty, he says, which sounds like something a poet might mutter after a disappointing séance. You follow him to a small cabinet where he places the notebook among dozens of others, each labeled with dates and locations. Some of them are tiny, just thin booklets. Others are enormous, bound in leather and showing signs of use. One has a corner chewed clean off, perhaps by a mouse, perhaps by nerves. He runs a finger along their spines with a reverence most people reserve for holy texts or rare first editions. You begin to suspect he loves the notebooks more than the ghosts themselves, and maybe that's the real secret. For many Victorian ghost hunters, it wasn't necessarily about proving the afterlife. It was about feeling like you were part of something bigger, something liminal, something you could almost touch if you just wrote it down fast enough. You pick up one of the older notebooks. The cover is cracked, the binding frayed. You open it and find a drawing of a sitting room, labeled meticulously. Couch, chandelier, participant X, observed a floating hat, source unconfirmed, a floating hat. You want to mock it, but you can't, because someone probably a lot like you sat in that room, in that dark, taking notes, while the impossible hovered just out of reach, and they cared enough to get the details right. Did it happen? Who knows? But they felt like it did, and the notebook is proof of that feeling. Langley closes the cabinet, locks it, and pockets the key. One must keep a clean record, he says, with the authority of a man who once labeled a sneeze as possible spiritual sneeze echo. He offers you tea. You accept. The séance is long over, but the atmosphere lingers, thick and strange, like breathing in a half-remembered dream. You sip your tea and look at your own notebook. It's not neat, it's barely legible in parts, but it's yours, and it's filled with scratches that mean something, or might mean something, or at the very least, will look very convincing in 100 years when some over-caffeinated historian finds it and says, "Ah yes, 1876, prime haunting season." As the fire dies completely and the house sinks into stillness, you can't help but wonder, who were they really writing for? Themselves, each other, the ghosts, or maybe you, maybe us, because here we are, all these years later, still talking about them, still flipping through their pages, still following their candlelit trail through dusty rooms and questionable knockings, and that somehow feels like exactly what they wanted. You're back in the séance room, though it feels different now. The chairs are askew, the lace tablecloth bunched in the middle like it recoiled from something, and a single candle guttering at the edge of the fireplace leaves flickers of light that come and go like breathing. Everyone's gone except for you, and of course the memory of it all, thick in the air like perfume that won't leave. But there's something else still lingering. A question: why did they insist on total darkness? It's one thing to light a few candles for mood, but Victorian ghost hunters didn't just dim the lights, they actively banned them. Shutters drawn, curtains sealed, gas lamps snuffed. They sat in rooms so dark you couldn't see your own hand, let alone a floating ghost trumpet. Mr. Langley, notebook always within reach, explained it with the earnestness of a man quoting scripture. Darkness is more conducive to spiritual manifestation. He didn't blink. You think he believed it. But as you sit here, legs stiff and slightly chilled, you wonder, was it really about spirits or about control? See, the darkness served more than one purpose. First and foremost, it eliminated distractions. No visual interference, no shifting glances, no obvious fraud. In the dark, everything becomes a possibility because nothing can be confirmed. It's simultaneously thrilling and suspicious. The other reason? Well, let's say it out loud. Ghosts are just more convincing when you can't see them. Historians still argue whether the darkness was a necessary atmospheric condition for spiritual energy, or a very convenient stage trick for mediums, who, let's just say, had unusually flexible elbows. Speaking of which, you take another look at the corner of the table. Just barely sticking out from under the tablecloth is a tiny metal rod. You're not sure if it's part of the furniture or part of the performance, but you can't stop staring at it. The Victorians loved rules. Even their séances came with rule books, and one of the most sacred was the dark room protocol. It wasn't formalized at first. Early spiritualists gathered with as much light as they liked, but as mediums grew more theatrical and skeptics more vocal, darkness became a defense. A ritual, a way to say, you weren't supposed to see anything. That's the whole point. Eventually, this turned into a kind of pseudo-scientific dogma. You may recall Florence Cook, one of the most famous Victorian mediums, whose séances with the supposed spirit Katie King drew attention from all over London. Her sessions were held in total darkness, with only the occasional lamplight allowed to be briefly turned on, usually just as the spirit vanished. Coincidence, obviously. In one infamous case, an eager skeptic reached out and grabbed the ghost. Surprise, it was Florence. The session ended early. The tea was still served, but not everyone faked it. At least, not consciously. Many mediums entered genuine trance-like states. They twitched, convulsed, whispered. Some spoke in strange languages. Others collapsed after the session, drenched in sweat. Their participants, educated, skeptical, rational men, often recorded these events with both awe and resignation. Possibly genuine, one note reads, in an 1875 logbook from Bath, or exceedingly good acting. In either case, darkness made it easier to believe. You sit in that same darkness now. Your candle is down to a stub. The shadows creep longer across the wallpaper, which, now that you notice, features an unsettling number of twisting vines and pale staring flowers. You understand the appeal. The darkness sharpens your hearing. your sense of space. Your imagination fills the gaps. A soft creak behind you, floorboards, or something else. Your hand reaches for your notebook. It's automatic now. You write possible sound behind left shoulder, too soft for identification, candle steady. And just like that, you've become part of the long tradition of recording in the dark. Not just listening for ghosts, but documenting the very act of listening. There's something beautifully absurd about it. The Victorians were surrounded by death, and not in an abstract way. Child mortality, war, tuberculosis, cholera, even accidents with chamber pots, you name it. Mourning wasn't a phase, it was a lifelong hobby. So naturally, they turned to the dark, not because it guaranteed answers, but because it felt like the space where answers might live. A room stripped of daylight became a blank page, and into that page, they poured their grief, hope, and the occasional cheesecloth ectoplasm. And then they wrote it down, always wrote it down. Your own notes are starting to look strangely formal. Observed change in draft quality. No visible source. You can't help but chuckle at yourself. If someone finds this notebook in 150 years, they'll assume you were very, very polite while being extremely paranoid. Langley re-enters the room, holding a candle on a dish, like he's walked straight out of a Dickens novel. He gives you a nod. Still writing. You nod back. You're not sure when it stopped being strange and started being natural. He glances down at your page. You've got the gift, he says, which sounds impressive until you remember he once complimented someone on their ability to alphabetize ghost names. The candle flickers again. This time you both feel it, not just the light, but something in the air. A faint tremble, a hush. Like the room exhaled. You don't move. Langley doesn't either. Then almost imperceptibly, the tablecloth lifts, just at the edge. Just for a second, Langley doesn't speak. He just reaches into his waistcoat pocket, pulls out his pencil, and begins to write. You follow suit, because whatever just happened, whatever didn't happen, whatever maybe almost sort of happened, it's already fading, already becoming a memory. But the note stays. And in this room, in this century, that's what mattered most. You stay seated, long after the flickering has stopped. Langley has retreated to another room again, possibly to update yet another chart, or to warm his hands on something stronger than tea. You're left with the table, the air still thick with the faint trace of lavender polish and burnt tallow, and the weight of what just happened, or maybe didn't. Either way, your pencil hovers. You're thinking about how hard it is to tell the truth in the dark. Not because you're lying, but because in this darkness, truth is slippery. Your eyes strain, your brain fills in gaps, and suddenly, you're not sure whether that movement was the edge of the curtain or a spirit tugging gently at reality. So what do? You write it down. That's what they did. That's what they all did. You flip back through your notebook, rereading what you've written. Some entries are detailed measurements, descriptions, diagrams. Others are just gestures toward confusion. Sound near fireplace. Could be draft. Could be cough. In Victorian ghost hunting, uncertainty wasn't failure. It was part of the documentation. And that brings you to the notebook itself. There was something almost sacred about it. The physical book, the act of writing. You're not looking at it like a diary anymore. You're looking at it like a ghost trap made of sentences. For Victorian investigators, the notebook was a tool just as important as the spirit trumpet or the slate board. It was proof. not of ghosts, necessarily, but of sincerity. A record that they were paying attention, that they weren't just sitting in the dark drinking spiked tea and hallucinating the afterlife. They took it seriously. You remember Langley telling you earlier, there's a difference between memory and observation, and you're beginning to see what he meant. In fact, the further you go down this rabbit hole, the more you realize just how intricate the note-taking rituals were. Some investigators even timed the intervals between knocks with pocket watches. Others developed complex charts to track temperature changes, usually inaccurate, but impressively detailed. A few even had standardized terminology. You once saw a glossary from 1881 that defined LK as light knock and SDA as sudden draft anomaly. The modern part of your brain wants to scoff, but the other part, sitting here, in this dim room full of whispers and wonder, kind of respects it. Historians still debate whether the act of documenting in such obsessive detail was about capturing ghosts or warding off the unbearable randomness of death. Because in truth, Victorian ghost hunting wasn't just about the dead, it was about grief, about trying to organize the chaos of losing someone into columns and footnotes, about turning a tearful absence into a line graph, if only to feel like you hadn't lost everything. You look down at your own chart. Yes, you've made one. You didn't mean to. But now there's a little grid with timestamps, movement indicators, and a scribbled map of the room with an X, where you swear the tablecloth fluttered. You've been converted. And now Langley returns, this time not alone. He's brought another guest, a quiet woman in her late 60s, dressed in a dark, sensible dress with an odd glint in her eye. She's introduced simply as Miss Ellesmere, though the way Langley says it makes you think she has a reputation. Miss Ellesmere specializes in transcription, he whispers, as if that's the most powerful skill in the world. She nods at you politely, then unrolls a velvet bundle, revealing 3 fountain pens, a tiny inkwell, and a pair of thin reading glasses. You watch as she takes a seat near the fireplace, lights a stubby candle no bigger than her thumb, and begins transcribing Langley's notes with terrifying precision. Her script is flawless, copperplate, effortless. You glance at your own notes, full of crossouts, tea stains, and a suspicious scribble you can't even identify. Miss Ellesmere is part of a secret class of ghost hunting scribes, usually women, often anonymous, who took the field notes of Victorian séances and transformed them into proper records. They didn't attend the events to participate or summon. They came to preserve. There are entire collections in dusty university libraries, hundreds of séances, recorded and archived, all written in the same quiet, careful hand. Miss Ellesmere doesn't flinch as she writes. She doesn't pause, doesn't sigh, doesn't react to anything, not even when the candle flickers and the room cools. Langley whispers, "She's the best." And now you're wondering how many ghost stories were really born from moments like this, not during the séance itself, but in the quiet hours afterward, as people reconstructed the memory under soft candlelight and careful ink. Was it 3 knocks, or 2? Did the teacup move an inch, or did it only seem like it? Was the table cold because a ghost touched it, or because no one had stoked the fire in an hour? It hardly matters, because the written record is what survives. The notes become reality, and once transcribed, Once the words settle into paper, they become just as real as any ghost. You close your notebook for a moment, just to rest your fingers. You've been writing for hours, and your hand aches in that pleasant, purposeful way. The candle beside you is nothing but a stub now, its wax puddling on the saucer like a miniature glacier. You hear Miss Ellesmere clearing her throat, just once. Then she flips to a new page and begins again. Langley, who's been quietly sipping his tea, leans toward you and says, "This part is the most important. Not the knocks, not the slates, not the theatrics. It's this, the making of the record." You nod, because you know he's right. There's something powerful about turning the ephemeral into ink, about making sure that, even if no one else believes, at least someone wrote it down. So you do the only thing that makes sense. You open your notebook again. The candle gutters. Not dramatically. There's no ghostly exhale or sudden gust of icy wind, but with the quiet finality of wax, simply giving up. A faint curl of smoke rises and drifts toward the ceiling, dissolving into the wood-paneled gloom. You're left in near total darkness again. Miss Ellesmere, undeterred, leans closer to her stubby flame and keeps writing. Her pen scratches softly, rhythmically, like a beetle tap dancing across parchment. Langley leans back in his chair, staring at nothing in particular, which in this house could mean anything from deep contemplation to the casual observation of a Victorian poltergeist. You, however, are distracted by what Langley has just placed on the table. A trumpet, not the brass kind that blares in parades. No, this one is long, slightly bent, and made of tin or something close to it. Painted black, chipped at the rim, and hollow inside. Eerily so. This is a spirit trumpet. And yes, you're going to be using it. You raise an eyebrow. Langley nods solemnly, like a man who's just handed you the family saber. He explains, quietly, reverently, that the spirit trumpet is a tool for audio amplification. Spirits, he says, are notoriously faint talkers, like elderly librarians at a funeral. The trumpet allows their whispers to travel, sometimes even manifest audibly. If you're lucky, you are not convinced. Victorians, however, were quite taken with the idea. These trumpets were regular fixtures at séances. By the mid-1800s, mediums would place them upright in the center of the table, or if they were more theatrical, suspend them in the air. And then everyone would wait and wait until eventually someone claimed to hear a whisper, a voice, or at least a sigh. Of course, this led to certain complications. The trumpets had a tendency to float, not in the supernatural sense, but in the suspicious, balanced on string or human knee sense. And as séances became more performative, mediums developed increasingly complex methods for making the trumpets move without appearing to move them. Historians still argue whether any spirit trumpet phenomena were ever real, or if they simply reveal the astonishing core strength of Victorian mediums. But even knowing all this, you still find yourself curious. Langley dims the lantern again, just a soft glow now. He places the trumpet at the center of the table, points the mouthpiece toward the ceiling, and folds his hands in his lap. "Listen," he says, "and write what you hear." You hold your pencil awkwardly, ready for disappointment. At first, it's exactly what you expect. Nothing. The sound of nothing. The way only a truly quiet room can sound, full of creaks, breaths, and the occasional stomach gurgle from someone who shouldn't have had the pickled eggs earlier. Then, something odd. A whistle. Not a full-blown sound, more like a hiss or a sigh through teeth. Faint, barely there. Could be the trumpet adjusting, could be wind, could be mice, but Langley's eyes are wide. He whispers, "Did you get that?" You nod, more to humor him than anything. You scribble, faint, whistle, duration, 1.5 seconds, no origin confirmed, and then comes the real surprise. A word. You're not sure you heard it correctly. It's like someone whispered from far away through a paper tube, just a fragment of a word. Maybe hall, maybe call, maybe nothing at all. Langley leans in. Again, he breathes. The trumpet sits perfectly still, and yet, another word, maybe. You could swear it's leave, or believe, or Steve. You feel absurd writing this down, but you do. Word possibly heard. Leave, or variant. No confirmation. Langley also observed. There's a strange power in this act, in this quiet, flickering moment where you're listening so hard your ears ring, in this willingness to believe, not in ghosts necessarily, but in the process of listening. You realize something else too. Victorian ghost hunters weren't stupid. They knew the trumpet could be manipulated. They knew many mediums faked voices, blew lightly through tubes, or muttered phrases when no one was paying attention. But they also believed that buried inside all that nonsense might be something real. That if you sat long enough, quietly enough, seriously enough, you might catch the edge of something you weren't supposed to hear. Langley now pulls out a notebook labeled Trumpet Sessions, Voluf 2. You flip through it. Aussies, pages and pages of transcriptions. Some read like nonsense. Yawn, rain, table, sorry, horse, mother, sleep now. Others are spookier. He was under the stairs. Don't answer the second bell. But your favorite. Gerald is a poor listener. You wonder if Gerald ever saw that. Some pages include diagrams of where people sat, where the trumpet was placed, and even notes on the angle of the whispers. Langley points to one labeled, Possible Dorsal Whisper Anomaly. You stare at him. He says, completely deadpan, Spirits sometimes speak from behind the neck. You write it down, because why not? At this point, the darkness is your co-author, and the longer you sit here, the more you understand why they needed to take notes, because otherwise, none of it feels real. None of it sticks. A séance is fog, but a notebook lasts. Eventually, Langley removes the trumpet, wraps it in cloth like a sleeping baby, and stores it back in his case. He doesn't say whether it worked. He doesn't need to, because he got what he came for: words, observations, scribbles in the night that tomorrow will become the next entry in Trumpet Sessions, Voluf 3. You look at your own page. Spirit trumpet, uncertain success, possible whispers, leave, Hall believe, Gerald, lingering draft, after final word. It's not proof, but it's something. And in this dim, unsteady world of gaslight and grief, something was often enough. The trumpet is gone, but its presence still echoes around the room, like a conversation you half remember from a dream. Langley has returned to his seat, notebook open again, pencil freshly sharpened. Miss Ellesmere remains stationed near the hearth, now transcribing from a different bundle of notes in tidy, looping script. The room is dim, warm, and faintly ridiculous in its seriousness. You stretch your fingers and glance at the table. Langley notices. You'll want to see this next one, he murmurs, and produces what looks like a damp rag. Except it isn't. It's ectoplasm, or at least that's what it's pretending to be. He places the substance, cold, clammy, translucent, onto a porcelain saucer. You lean closer. It's stretchy, smells vaguely like old laundry and anxiety. You can touch it, he says, carefully. You do. It's like handling wet cheesecloth, soaked in sorrow. Welcome to the strangest obsession of the Victorian ghost hunting world. Ectoplasm. Not the green goo from movies, not the sparkly fog from Halloween parties, but a mysterious, semi-physical substance allegedly expelled by mediums during deep trances. It was said to emerge from the nose, mouth, ears, other less mentionable places, sometimes as mist, sometimes as thread, sometimes as a fully formed hand, which is, frankly, a deal breaker. And every time someone wrote it down, you glance at Langley's notebook, which now contains a rather detailed diagram. Ectoplasmic sample, approx. 3.5 inches, appeared damp, possibly organic, smelled faintly of starch and goose fat. You raise an eyebrow. Goose fat? He shrugs. It was the 19th century. People cooked everything in goose fat, including ghost stories. You jot that down too. Historians still argue whether ectoplasm was ever truly believed or simply tolerated as part of the séance performance. Some mediums genuinely appeared to produce something. Others were caught hiding muslin in their undergarments, ready to pull it out at the right moment. There are even reports of mediums who swallowed cheesecloth hours beforehand, regurgitating it on command. One infamous case involved a woman who stuffed her cheeks like a Victorian hamster. The séance was declared a success until someone switched on the gas lamp too quickly and saw the string hanging out of her mouth like dental floss. Still, not everyone was so easily convinced. Some ghost hunters, especially those with a scientific bent, examined the samples under microscopes. They cataloged the texture, the smell, the rate at which the substance evaporated. They even collected samples in jars, which you can still find in museum archives today, labeled in careful handwriting. Specimen, 1894, possibly of spiritual origin, also possibly linen. Langley holds up a magnifying glass and peers at the sample in front of you. See the frayed edge? That suggests hand cutting, but the stain in the middle could be spontaneous manifestation. You look, you see a stain, you're not convinced, but still, you're writing. And that's the thing. The power of the moment is often stronger than the evidence. The silence of the room, the dim candlelight, the reverent tone, these things make even the most dubious substance feel like sacred relic. Langley delicately folds the ectoplasm back into a small muslin envelope, which he labels ectoplasmic residue. Session 12. You're still trying to decide whether he's joking. Then he produces a second envelope. This one contains a photograph. It's sepia-toned, slightly curled at the edges, and shows a medium mid-trance with what appears to be a gauzy ribbon flowing from her nose. You blink. Langley says, "This one's real. 1892. Taken under controlled conditions. Of course, skeptics claim it's staged." You stare harder. It really does look like muslin. But here's the rub. The Victorians didn't care whether you believed it. They weren't ghost hunters for you. They were doing it for the person they lost. The child, the sister, the father who died in Crimea and never made it home. They didn't need the ectoplasm to be real. They needed it to mean something. And in that spirit, they took their notes seriously. Langley turns to a page where he's recorded previous ectoplasmic encounters. Session 4. White mist. Approx. 6 in. No odor. Session 6. Substance clung to curtain briefly. Faint crackling noise. Each entry has a small hand-drawn diagram. He even notes ambient temperature and the behavior of the candle flame. You flip through and find one labeled Session 8, medium produced visible hand shape, slightly wet, receded before contact. No one screamed. You appreciate the restraint. Now Miss Ellesmere begins to write. Not just transcription now. She's composing. Langley leans in. We keep a second record, one that captures the tone of the session, the emotional ectoplasm, if you like. You almost drop your pencil. Emotional ectoplasm. That's a thing now. Miss Ellesmere writes in flowing sentences, almost literary. The room felt thick with memory. The substance glistened like a promise unkept. Langley observed with the calm of a man watching his own doubts curdle. You're not sure whether to laugh or applaud. But again, it doesn't matter. What matters is the documentation, the dedication to keeping some kind of record, no matter how strange, no matter how soggy. You begin your own note. Encountered sample of alleged ectoplasm. Texture, gauze-like. Odor, starch, possibly poultry adjacent. Atmosphere, curious, slightly absurd. Medium not present. Substance residual. Observer maintains. High degree of skepticism alongside inexplicable affection. You underline affection, because weird as it is, there's something touching about this whole endeavor. This willingness to sit in the dark, to pass around damp linen, to pretend, even for a moment, that the veil is thin and someone might be waving from the other side. Not with proof, just with residue. The ectoplasm has been tidied away, tucked delicately into its labeled envelope, sealed like a letter no one truly wants to open again. Miss Ellesmere has returned to her transcription, unbothered by the lingering scent of damp linen and old starch. Langley is already reaching into yet another case, the look on his face somewhere between a magician preparing a trick and a dentist reaching for forceps. What he removes next is, at first glance, utterly ordinary. A handkerchief, white, soft, creased from long folding. The kind of thing you might wave at a departing train, or apparently used to summon spirits. He lays it on the table and gives you a long look. Tell me, he says with his usual understated flair, what's the most haunted joint in the human body? You blink. Haunted joint. Langley nods solemnly. Elbows. And yes, he's being serious. If Victorian ghost hunting had a weak point, a sort of Achilles elbow if you will, it was this. A baffling number of supernatural events occurred within arm's reach of the medium's bending bits. The elbow, the wrist, the knee, occasionally, but mostly the elbow. You watch as Langley begins flipping through yet another notebook, one filled with diagrams that look disturbingly like medical illustrations, all focused on the positioning of limbs during séances. The spirit taps, he explains, pointing to one sketch, almost always occur near the medium's left elbow. That's not a coincidence. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still debate whether this elbow obsession was earnest observation or subtle shade from early skeptics. But one thing is certain, elbow-related ghost phenomena were reported with a frequency that bordered on statistical absurdity. Take, for example, a famous 1879 séance in Manchester where a tambourine flew across the room, only for the observers to later realize the medium's shawl had bunched up suspiciously close to her elbow. Or the 1883 case of a floating slate which hovered briefly before gently tapping the forearm of the medium. Again, elbow adjacent. Coincidence? Langley doesn't think so. He shows you a page labeled Joint Manifestation Anomalies, Vol. I. It lists every documented moment of alleged supernatural contact that occurred within 6 inches of a medium's elbow, categorized by type, knocks, breezes, objects moved, and miscellaneous tremblings. You do a quick count. There are 34, some are elaborate. Session 5, left elbow of medium vibrated visibly for 7 seconds. Bell rang simultaneously. No hand contact observed. Others are delightfully blunt. Session 9, elbow knocked over sugar bowl. Langley taps the page. We tried restraints, ties, fixed armrests, but the spirits always found a way. You suspect the spirits may have had help, but still, the documentation was meticulous. Ghost hunters weren't blind to the potential for fraud. They just had a stubborn optimism that somewhere, buried within the sea of twitching elbows and swaying curtains, there might be something real. One particularly dramatic case involved a medium who insisted spirits always pulled on her left sleeve during contact. She wore a short-sleeved blouse to one séance to disprove skeptics, only for a ghostly handkerchief to land softly on her bare elbow mid-session. Langley tells this story like it's gospel. You sip your tea, you write it down. The elbow thing isn't just physical. There's a symbolic weight to it, too. The elbow is where movement hides, subtle, small, capable of sleight of hand. But it's also oddly intimate. You don't notice elbows until someone bumps them. They're part of the body's private background music. In a way, it's almost poetic that ghosts preferred them. Or maybe mediums just used them because they were there, invisible beneath shawls, hidden under tablecloths, ready for a gentle nudge when no one was looking. Langley now pulls out a sketch, a charcoal drawing of a medium mid-trance, arms limp at her side, with faint swirling lines drawn near her elbows. The caption reads, Spirit Energy Emanation, Session 14, Plymouth. You admire the commitment. Then he flips to another, a diagram of a custom séance chair, complete with padded elbow cradles and weighted cuffs meant to limit movement. It never worked, he sighs. If the spirits wanted the elbow, they'd get it. Miss Ellesmere, who hasn't said a word in the past hour, finally pipes up. Session 19, she murmurs, not looking up from her pen. The spirit yanked her sleeve so hard the button popped. Langley beams, one of our more assertive ghosts, and so you find yourself adding to the canon. You make your own notation. Medium's elbow observed in relaxed state. No overt movement. Candle flickered at moment of brief twitch. No sound. Tea remains stable. It's absurd, but you're doing it. You're participating in a grand Victorian tradition of trying to pin the ephemeral to the page, of giving shape to the shapeless through sheer force of penmanship. You imagine future generations looking back at these notes, trying to decipher the truth of it all. Was it fraud? Was it faith? Was it both? Or maybe it was just a group of people grieving in velvet-trimmed rooms, hoping that the dead still had elbows and occasionally reached out to use them. You are now officially elbow aware. Every tiny movement, every twitch or shrug or adjustment around the table seems loaded with intention. Is that a simple stretch, or is the spirit world knocking through the funny bone again? You stifle a laugh and glance at Langley. He's dead serious. Pardon the phrase. He's positioned the chairs with military precision, measuring exact elbow distances from the table's edge. Miss Elsmer watches from her post near the fireplace, her quill tapping gently against her inkwell, as if keeping time with the silence. Tonight's séance is different. No new instruments, no spirit trumpet, just silence, a few tightly folded napkins, and a blank notebook in front of every participant. Why? Because the ghost apparently wants to write. Welcome to the glorious, bewildering world of spirit messages, the Victorians' favorite literary subgenre. You're about to experience what spiritualists called automatic writing. The idea was simple. The spirit would take control of the medium's hand, sometimes just fingers, sometimes the whole arm, and write messages from beyond, short ones mostly, cryptic, often frustrating, and yes, occasionally riddled with spelling mistakes that would haunt a modern editor more than the ghost itself. You're not entirely sure what to expect, but you're game. Langley dims the lamp to a respectable gloom, and the medium, a young man named Edwin, who looks like he's never slept in full daylight, closes his eyes. The room breathes in. Nothing happens for a full 5 minutes. Then slowly, Edwin's hand starts to move. Not dramatically, not violently, just a small twitch, a curl of the fingers, a soft sliding motion across the page. Langley leans forward like a cat, watching a mouse. The pencil drags a line, then another. The shapes are rough at first. You tilt your head and squint. It looks like a name, Mabel, followed by something less clear. Maybe light or fight or flight of bees. This is very on brand for ghost handwriting. You write it all down, because whether it makes sense or not, this is how it's done. Ghost hunters didn't wait for full sentences or clarity. They transcribed the moment, the hand twitch, the pause, even the tension in the medium's brow. Langley's notes are already 3 pages deep. 6:54 p.m. First contact. Medium's grip changed. Writing began slow, became more fluid. First word appears to be Mabel. No additional movement, no visible trance. Historians still debate whether automatic writing was genuinely unconscious behavior or a kind of deeply focused improvisation. Some mediums claimed they had no memory of what they wrote. Others confessed, years later, that they simply felt like writing, and the audience's belief filled in the rest. But back then, these scribbles were treated like telegrams from the spirit realm. Some messages were full of emotion. Tell Mary I forgave her. Others were maddeningly vague. The light comes. And then there were the deeply unhelpful ones. Turn the cushion. Button behind the wall. It is not soup. You once saw a transcript where the ghost had apparently spent 20 minutes just writing the word shoelace repeatedly. Langley proudly framed it. Tonight's message continues. Edwin's pencil makes smaller, faster motions now. Loops, curls, then it stops. Everyone leans in. Langley whispers, interpretation time. You squint at the paper. There's Mabel again. Then, I see light. She was here. Do not ask. That's it. Miss Elsmere transcribes it immediately, adding session 10. Message from alleged Mabel. No further elaboration. Room remained quiet. Medium's pulse unchanged. You glance at Langley. He's glowing. This to him is gold. Not because it makes sense. Not because it's provable. But because it happened in the séance room, with controlled conditions, under observation. To a Victorian ghost hunter, that's everything. You find yourself writing again. Automatic writing observed. Content cryptic. Emotion unclear. Spelling stable. No physical changes noted in medium except posture shift. You pause. Add possibly inspired by emotional memory or subconscious triggers. Or possibly, Mabel. That's the other thing about these messages. They were often personal, not always to the medium, sometimes to the participants, other times to no one at all. Just names and phrases tossed like paper boats into a fog. It didn't matter, because each message felt like a glimpse, a breath, a voice carried on pencil strokes. There are archives filled with them, whole volumes of ghost-written notes, pages torn from séance pads, now pressed between glass and libraries that smell like old paper and theories. There's even a collection in Cambridge, devoted entirely to messages from one ghost named Geraldine, who mostly wrote recipes and once spent an entire session correcting someone's Latin declensions. You don't even care if it's real anymore. There's something oddly soothing about the whole thing. A ghost with opinions on grammar. Delightful. Edwin stirs. The pencil drops. Langley approaches like a museum curator and gently lifts the sheet. No tremor, he says. Consistent pressure. I'd say he was fully under. You look at Edwin, who's rubbing his eyes. What did I write? He asks groggily. Langley holds up the paper. Someone named Mabel says hi. Also, don't ask. Edwin shrugs. Sounds like her. Everyone chuckles quietly. Even Miss Ellesmere allows herself a rare tight smile. You glance down at your notebook and find you've written a full page, not just about the writing, but about the moment, the softness of the candlelight, the hushed awe, the odd reverence of people staring at a scrap of paper like it's a holy artifact. And maybe it is, not because it proves anything, but because it captures something fleeting, a moment of collective stillness, imagination, and a willingness to believe that even silence might spell something out. The séance table is cluttered now, not with chaos, but with evidence, or at least what the Victorians would have considered evidence. Sheets of scrawled messages, candle drippings, caught mid-run pencils worn to stubs, and one glass of water that everyone swears tasted strange after the ghost used it, though someone admits it may have just been a splash of gin. Langley is rearranging everything with the care of a museum archivist preparing a public display. He speaks softly, but quickly. He's excited now. You can tell. Now we document the environmental changes, he says. The room speaks, even when the spirits don't. You're not entirely sure what that means, but he points to a bundle of tools you hadn't noticed before. It looks like the contents of a very confused gentleman's grooming kit. Among the items, a small bell, 2 thermometers, a feather, a coil of wire, and a tiny glass bottle with what appears to be old ash. Langley catches your expression and smiles. Let me introduce you to the sensory suite. This is your first real encounter with the psychic investigator, not the flamboyant medium or the grieving widow, but the rationalist with too many pockets. The one who brings instruments, theories, and calibrated spoons. The one who wants to measure a ghost's sigh. Victorian ghost hunting wasn't just table rapping and melodrama. There was a subset of investigators, often men with scientific leanings, or at least access to monocles, who approached hauntings like lab experiments. They didn't want to believe, they wanted to record. Langley naturally is one of them. He shows you a tiny notebook labeled Session Environmentals, Voller 7th, inside graphs, tiny wobbly, completely unconvincing temperature charts. Room temp dropped from 64 degrees Fahrenheit to 61 degrees Fahrenheit in 5 minutes. Coincided with presence of alleged cold spot behind medium's chair. Candle flickered inward, no open windows, no draft confirmed. You flip the page and see another entry. Smell of sulfur near northeast wall. Lasted 3.5 seconds. No visible source. Medium sneezed shortly afterward. Possible spirit allergy. You try not to laugh. You fail quietly. But again, it's not about whether it's real. It's about whether it's written down. The psychic investigators often brought more than just notebooks. Some carried early electromagnetic detectors, primitive contraptions made of brass and speculation. Others tried photographic plates, convinced that ghosts could only be seen in silver nitrate, and some relied entirely on scent. You're not joking. Langley gestures toward a small wooden box and opens it to reveal 5 tiny vials, each labeled in exquisite calligraphy: rosewater, musk, sulfur, parlor soap, unknown. These are olfactory anchors, he explains. Spirits often carry the sense of their past. You blink. Apparently, scent-based ghost tracking was briefly fashionable in the 1870s. Mediums would pause mid-trance and announce a smell: tobacco, lavender, boiled mutton, often corresponding to someone's departed relative. Investigators then took notes, identified the smell, and wrote long, earnest letters debating its authenticity. Historians still argue whether these scents were psychosomatic, socially cued, or the result of someone sneaking snacks during long sessions. Langley offers you a whiff of the unknown vial. It smells like damp church pews and something faintly metallic. You note it anyway. Session 11 vial, scent #5, unidentifiable, evokes memory of brass and moist upholstery. No immediate associations. Candle steady, then comes the feather. You can't believe it either. Langley sets the feather upright in a glass jar with a weighted base and places it on the table. Watch, he says. The slightest movement could indicate a shift in spirit presence. You watch. It does not move. Langley doesn't seem disappointed. Sometimes, the absence of movement is its own message. You nod solemnly, as though this is not the most Victorian sentence ever spoken. Then he adds, "We once had a feather fly across the room. Turned out to be a draft from under the door, but we noted it just the same." And that right there is the key to the psychic investigator's role. It wasn't about confirming ghosts. It was about refusing to dismiss any detail, no matter how trivial, embarrassing, or obviously the result of poor insulation. They cataloged it all: every sound, every temperature drop, every smell and breeze, not because they believed every moment was sacred, but because any moment might be. There's something comforting in that. You begin your own environmental entry. Room temp holding steady. No visible breeze. Candle remains upright. Slight creak heard at 8:12 p.m. Possibly floorboard or spirit disapproval. Langley nods in approval. You're getting the hang of it. You want to roll your eyes, but you also kind of love it. And deep down you know this obsessive cataloging wasn't just about ghosts. It was about control. In a century full of grief, change, and industrial chaos, the séance room offered a strange kind of order, a place where everything mattered, even the way a feather didn't move. Miss Ellesmere closes her notebook for the night. Langley gently places the vials back in their case, careful not to disturb the delicate layering of cotton lining each compartment. You remain seated, your notes in front of you, still absorbing the quiet magic of a room where silence is data, darkness is clarity, and the slightest creak might earn a whole page in the archive. You're beginning to suspect that ghost hunting has less to do with ghosts and more to do with being extremely observant in rooms where absolutely nothing is happening. And yet, here you are. still writing. Langley returns from wherever he disappears between sessions, likely a coat closet with charts, carrying something new. Not an object this time, but an idea. He says it softly, like he's quoting scripture. Do spirits have a scent? You blink. I mean, maybe. He nods as if you've just passed a metaphysical exam. What follows is a masterclass in Victorian ghost scent theory, a topic you didn't know existed and now can't stop thinking about. Langley explains that for certain spiritualists, scent wasn't just atmospheric, it was evidence. Ghosts, they believed, carried with them olfactory traces of their lives. A whiff of cigar smoke, Uncle Henry. The sudden smell of lilacs, probably dear Aunt Judith. And then, of course, there were the less pleasant spirits. Some, Langley murmurs, smell like burnt matches. You glance nervously at the candle. Apparently, this theory had enough traction to warrant entire chapters in ghost hunting manuals. Investigators carried scent journals, literal smell logs, to record odors encountered during séances. Some even ranked them for strength, duration, and emotional impact. Langley hands you one such volume. It's bound in cracked leather, labeled Volatile Manifestations, 1876, 1880. Inside are entries that read like the dream diary of a perfumer having a nervous Session 3. Sudden odor of fresh hay. No livestock present. Medium wept. Session 7. Camphor and smoke. Simultaneously. Very unsettling. Candle extinguished shortly after. Session 12. Rotting fruit and damp wool. Mrs. Fenwick fainted. You sniff the air. Nothing. Maybe candle wax, ink, and the faint ghost of goose fat. But Langley insists they come and go, like a warning or a calling card. Miss Ellesmere, ever diligent, turns a page in her own scent ledger and adds, still nothing as strange as Session 22, brine and cucumbers. Absolutely no explanation. You're still processing the idea that ghosts might be pickled, and it makes a strange kind of sense. Smell is memory's strongest trigger. A scent can transport you instantly to a room, a person, a moment. Why wouldn't spirits use it? Historians still debate whether these scents were ever truly paranormal, or simply the result of old homes and even older plumbing. But back then, people took it seriously. In fact, one particularly famous investigator named Percival Bainbridge published an entire catalog of spectral aromas in 1882. It included over 70 scent profiles, cross-referenced by ghost temperament and time of manifestation. You nearly drop your pencil at the entry. No 37, acrid bituminous, associated with malevolent energy and furniture rearrangement. Langley sets a vial on the table. It's labeled sulfur. You sniff. Immediate regret. The scent punches you in the sinuses. Eggy. Sharp. Inarguably wrong. If ghosts smell like this, you'd rather stay haunted. Langley records your reaction. Subject recoiled at scent. Eyes watered. No visible apparition. Thanks, Langley. And yet, you're already writing. Not because you believe the sulfur is summoning spirits, but because the ritual of observation feels meaningful, like you're doing something important, even if you can't explain why. Langley moves on to the next vial. Rosewater. Much better. Soft, floral, nostalgic. Common in benevolent visitations, he says, especially from maternal spirits. You sniff again. This one feels familiar. Not supernatural, maybe, but comforting. Then comes the final vial. Unknown. You open it and immediately frown. It's earthy, wet, faintly metallic, like rain on old iron. You note it. Scent #3 evokes imagery of wet stone, soil, emotional response, curiosity tinged with discomfort. Langley smiles. Now you're thinking like an investigator. And that's the point. This isn't about finding ghosts. It's about paying attention to the unnoticed, the ephemeral, the moments between events. Even if that means sniffing ghost jars for an hour. The fire has dimmed again. Miss Ellesmere sets down her pen. Langley reseals the vials. And you sit in the quiet, breathing in the faint mingling of candle wax, rosewater, sulfur, and mystery. Somewhere in this mess of smells and ink and half-felt breezes is a story. Maybe it isn't about spirits at all. Maybe it's just about remembering a person, a moment, a life, through a scent, through a page, through the kind of attention that only happens when the world goes dim and your senses sharpen and your pencil hovers just above the paper, waiting to catch a ghost or something like one. It's nearly midnight now. You can tell not by any clock. Langley insists timekeeping devices disrupt the ether, but by the shift in the room's mood. The fireplace has shrunk to a few glowing embers. The shadows have grown long and strangely gentle. Even the squeaky chair has fallen silent, as though it too is listening. You, Langley, and Miss Ellesmere remain. The others have gone, slowly peeling away like characters from a dream. Edwin, the medium, excused himself an hour ago, mumbling something about needing a vibrational reset. Langley didn't blink, but no one's leaving just yet, because tonight you're observing the phenomenon of the tilting table. Langley lifts the heavy oak séance table slightly, just a leg or two, and then lets it fall back into place with a satisfying thud. Solid, he says. Always start with a baseline. You write it down. Now, he explains the process. Participants place their fingertips lightly, very lightly, on the table's surface. Not enough to move it, just enough to feel. Then the room is darkened. The candles snuff to a whisper, and they wait. If all goes according to plan, the table will begin to rock, slowly, gently. Perhaps it will tilt, lift, even shuffle a little across the floor. Sometimes it knocks once for yes, twice for no. Other times it just dances. To skeptics, this is obvious ideomotor response, a fancy way of saying your muscles move unconsciously. But to the Victorians, it was spirit communication through furniture. The table wasn't just moving, it was answering. And as you place your fingers on the cool wood, you begin to see why it captivated them. The room goes still, utterly, perfectly still. You can hear your own heartbeat. Then, a creak. The table shifts. Not much, just a tiny rise under your right pinky. You instinctively glance around, but everyone's hands are visible. No one's pushing, no one's moving, at least not noticeably. You write first movement, subtle lift, right quadrant, duration, approx. 2 seconds, no apparent trigger. Langley's hand hovers over his own notebook. Miss Ellesmere watches without touching. Her job now is to observe the observers. The table tilts again. Langley whispers, "That's a yes." A pause, another tilt. "That's a no." It continues, slowly, awkwardly, like a toddler learning to nod. Questions are asked, silently or aloud, and the table responds with tilts and taps. Is anyone with us? Yes. Do you wish to communicate? Yes. Are you the cat? Pause. No. Historians still argue whether table tilting was purely mechanical trickery or the result of sincere group delusion. Some sessions involved hidden wires, weighted boots, or clever knees. Others, Honest attempts, with hands resting gently and hearts pounding harder than anyone admitted. Langley shows you a logbook from 1877, pages and pages of table responses, a full conversation transcribed in 3 columns. Question, tilt, interpretation. One entry reads, "Did you die here?" Tilt, 1x. Follow-up, where? Table slides west. Interpretation, back bedroom closet. You don't know whether to laugh or light a candle. You decide on both. Tonight's table session is quiet, but not empty. You feel something subtle, a pressure, maybe, or a tension beneath your fingertips. The table sways a little, never enough to surprise you, but just enough to make your skin tingle. You try to catch Langley cheating, but he looks as still as a statue. You glance at Miss Ellesmere. She raises an eyebrow and scribbles something. You suspect it says, "Subject appears mildly spooked, candle stable, elbows behaving." You return to your own notes, movement steady, no clear pattern beyond basic yes, no. Table responds more confidently to Langley's questions. Personal inquiries less successful. You've become fluent in furniture fluency. Langley shares one of his proudest table logs, a session where the table allegedly spelled out the name of a lost soldier letter by letter. It took over an hour. At one point, the table hesitated between M and N. Langley insists that hesitation was emotionally charged. You believe him. A little. It's funny how something so absurd can feel so earnest. That's the core of it, isn't it? The séance isn't about spectacle. It's about a group of people, sitting quietly, all willing to believe the table might speak, to believe that loss doesn't end at silence, that grief might have echoes, and those echoes might knock politely before answering yes or no, or leave the broom in the closet. You jot down one final line for the night. Table tilting conclusive. No, convincing. Sometimes. Comforting. More than expected. Langley finally leans back. The candles are burning low. Miss Ellesmere is yawning behind her hand, still managing to transcribe in perfect penmanship. You withdraw your hands from the table. They're warm now, and slightly sore. You hadn't realized how much you'd tensed. Langley closes his notebook and says, "Not bad. 3 full movements, 1 false start and a definitive no on the cat." You smile, genuinely. Then you hear it. A soft tap behind you. Just one. Everyone freezes. Langley does not move. Miss Ellesmere raises an eyebrow but says nothing. You write. Post-session tap. Source unclear. No wind. No movement. Candle steady. Because of course you do. Because this is what you do now. You take notes. You take ghosts seriously. Just long enough to give them the dignity of being written down. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. Same table. Same shadows. Same pencil. Different knock. The room is clearing out again. Not physically. Your chair remains firmly planted. The table hasn't attempted any dramatic exits. But emotionally, that thick, humming atmosphere of anticipation that hung over the séance has begun to unravel. The tension has evaporated, leaving behind only ash, candle wax, and the scribbled residue of half-believed moments. But Langley isn't done yet. "Oh no," he says, almost cheerfully. Now comes the best part. He retrieves a thin, leather-bound volume from the shelf behind him. The spine reads, "The Gentleman's Logbook of the Paranormal." You suspect that title wasn't meant ironically. He opens it with reverence, like he's revealing a sacred text. The pages inside are yellowed, filled with dense handwriting, cross-hatched sketches, diagrams of ghostly phenomena, and long flowing descriptions that read like a cross between a ship's log and a Victorian travel journal. Langley begins to read aloud. March 3rd, 1872. Encountered presence at number 14, Norwood Crescent. Gentle draft from southwest corner. Mild scent of cloves. Medium entered trance at precisely 8:37 p.m. Spoke in German. Medium does not speak German. He pauses, flips to another entry. April 19th, 1875. Séance interrupted by aggressive flickering of gaslight. Spirit claimed to be named Leonard. Answered 5 questions, all beginning with the letter T. Possibly a coincidence. You're hooked. Because, unlike the scribbled field notes and whispered speculations, this logbook reads like someone genuinely trying to narrate their way through a haunting. Not to prove it to the world, but to understand it. To make it feel real, readable, shareable. This is where ghost hunting crosses into art. You take a closer look at the entries. There's a rhythm to them. Each starts with the date, weather conditions, participants, then the phenomenon, described with the drama of a Gothic novel and the precision of an over-caffeinated librarian. One entry is almost a poem. November fog, thick as wool, knocked twice near fireplace. Medium claimed to see woman in gray, holding nothing. Nothingness, it turns out, is terrifying. Langley flips a few more pages. He shows you a hand-drawn sketch of a spirit trumpet mid-air, labeled Sketch from Recollection, altitude 2.5 feet, above rug. Witness, Miss Thistlethwaite. Beneath it, a diagram of candle positions during a highly agitated spirit entry. The candles are arranged in a star, each one marked with notes like flickered eastward and melted quickly. Possible supernatural heat burst. You're grinning now. Because this is madness, but it's also commitment. This wasn't a hobby for these people. It was a vocation. They weren't just trying to document ghosts. They were trying to write them into the world, to give them form, placement, context, to make them literary. Historians still argue whether these logbooks were true accounts or elaborate fictions created by men with too much spare time and not enough indoor plumbing. But regardless of authenticity, they're beautiful. Langley lets you hold the logbook. It's heavier than it looks. You can feel the pressure of ink and intention. Each page seems slightly bowed with the weight of someone's hope that they were right, that the knock, the breeze, the candle flicker really meant something. You flip to an entry from 1880, a sharp smell of violets, unexplained cold on left side, no medium present. Guest remarked they felt watched, but politely, left door open for remainder of evening. You scribble in your notebook, logbook entry, paranormal courtesy noted, ghost described as having good manners, unusual. Langley nods approvingly. Some of the best ghosts were extremely considerate. Miss Ellesmere chimes in without looking up. One apologized for making the wallpaper peel. Langley taps a page near the back. Here's the famous one. It's a long flowing entry detailing a séance where the table reportedly spun a full 360 degrees without touching anyone. Eyewitnesses swore it hovered. A china teacup shattered. The medium fainted. The log ends with the understated line, "Session ended early, tea rescheduled." That's the thing about these Victorian ghost hunters. They were devoted, yes, but they also had impeccable manners. You could be mid-possession, and someone would still ask if you wanted one lump or two. You take your own notes, now mimicking the style. Logbook Review, Session 14. Participants, Langley, Ellesmere. Self, temperature cool, wood smoke present. Phenomena, ghost log reading aloud, occasional emotional resonance. Mood, reflective, respectful, mildly amused. Ghosts, not confirmed, but strongly literary, and you start to feel it, the pull of the tradition, the sense that maybe what matters isn't whether the table lifted, or the ghost knocked twice, or whether Mabel really whispered through Edwin's wrist. Maybe what matters is that someone wrote it down. Langley closes the logbook gently and returns it to the shelf. We don't prove anything, he says softly. We preserve the possibility. And isn't that enough? In a world that changes too quickly, forgets too easily, the logbook is a small rebellion, a way of saying, this happened, or at least, we think it did, and that's worth remembering. You glance at your notebook. The pages are filling fast, with facts, with maybe facts, with moments that meant something, even if you're not sure what. And for tonight, that's your ghost, a logbook entry, waiting to be written. The logbook rests now on its shelf, quiet and dignified, like a retired actor basking in the glow of past performances. Langley has moved on to stoking the fire, his face momentarily lit by the dull orange flicker of embers. Miss Ellesmere continues writing, her pen gliding smoothly as ever, despite the hour. You're feeling drowsy, but Langley has other plans. Ever seen a ghost photograph? He asks. Before you can answer, he's already rifling through a stack of thick cardboard prints, each tucked into waxy sleeves. They smell faintly of mildew, dust, and that particular kind of paper that seems to whisper, I've been forgotten for a century. He lays one down in front of you. At first glance, it's just a formal Victorian portrait. A family of four, two parents, two children, pose stiffly in front of a draped curtain. But then you spot it, over the father's shoulder, something. A haze. No, more than a haze. A pale figure, woman-shaped, translucent, looking straight at the camera. You stare, blink. Langley doesn't say a word. He lets the silence do the work. Then he places a second photo beside it. A young man in uniform, seated with hands folded, and behind him, a faint form, child-sized, suspended mid-air, hands on his shoulders. Langley finally speaks. Spirit photography. One of the great hopes and great hoaxes of the 19th century. You nod slowly. You've heard of this. You just didn't expect the images to be so convincing. Or maybe you're just tired. He hands you another, and another. Soon the table is a spread of ghostly photobombs, ethereal heads peering over couches, faded faces emerging from curtains, disembodied hands resting casually on living shoulders. Some are clear fakes. You can tell. Bad cut and paste jobs, double exposures, bits of cheesecloth and gauze pretending to be phantoms. But some make your skin prickle. Langley flips to a famous one. This, he says, is the spirit of Fanny Barton, taken 1873. The photographer swore the plate was clean. You squint. Behind the sitter's chair is a faint outline of a woman. No face, just a silhouette, hair pulled back, a hand resting on the arm of the chair, but casting no shadow. Fanny had died 2 years earlier, Langley adds, of scarlet fever. The family didn't know she'd appear. They only wanted a photo for remembrance. You look up. Did they believe it? Langley shrugs. Enough to order 3 more copies. You smile. Not because it's funny, but because it's so human. This, more than anything, may have been what drove the spirit photography craze. The desire to see the ones we've lost. Not imagine them, not sense them, see them. And if a bit of gauze and double exposure made that happen, so be it. Historians still argue over whether early photographers meant to deceive or simply found themselves in high demand. William Mumler, one of the most infamous, claimed he only discovered ghost images by accident. Others accused him of elaborate trickery, secretly taking photos of the deceased beforehand and inserting them via darkroom sleight of hand. He was eventually put on trial for fraud. He was acquitted, not because he proved spirit photography was real, but because he convinced the court he couldn't be proven wrong. And in ghost hunting, that's half the battle. Langley shows you his own early experiments. He's taken photos during séances, carefully exposing plates in low light, hoping to catch even a flicker. Most are just shadows. One shows a strange smudge near Miss Ellesmere's shoulder. Langley swears it wasn't there in real life. You don't argue. You do, however, write spirit photography, observed prints, ranging from obvious fabrication to subtle visual anomalies, emotional resonance, consistent regardless of authenticity. Ghosts, it seems, appear wherever belief is already waiting. You flip the page. Add note, image of Fanny Barton, genuinely unsettling. Absence of facial features creates stronger impact than presence might have. Viewer filled in the rest. Perhaps that's the point. Langley places the photos back into their sleeves. Photographs, he says, became the modern séance. No need to gather in the dark anymore. Just mail your negatives and hope. It was true. Photography, for a time, replaced the need for mediums. Instead of summoning a spirit with table tilts and raps, you could hold up a photo and say, "Look, she's still here," even if she was mostly overexposure and wishful thinking. Miss Ellesmere, ever concise, chimes in without looking up. Spirit images were just Victorian selfies with the afterlife. Langley chuckles. You write that down too, but you're struck by something else. How still they all are. The photos, the faces, the ghosts, frozen forever, staring from the sepia beyond, not knocking or whispering or tilting tables, just watching. As if the ghosts aren't trapped in the image. You are. You take one last look at the photograph of Fanny Barton. Her featureless outline seems somehow more present than anything else in the room. You close your notebook slowly and write. Image observed, stillness louder than movement. Perhaps ghosts don't speak, they just stay. And that's the thing about spirit photography. It didn't give people proof, it gave them presence. And for those who missed someone beyond words, that was more than enough. The photographs have been carefully returned to their drawer, tucked in beside curls of protective paper and the ghosts of 1,000 stares. Langley dusts his hands with finality, as though completing a particularly delicate surgery. The fireplace crackles once, one bright little pop of embers before falling quiet again. But the stillness doesn't last. Langley turns to you, face now alight with a different sort of energy. The twinkle in his eye suggests scandal, controversy, a touch of petty rivalry. Now, he says, voice lowered, like he's letting you in on a secret, we must discuss the hoax wars of 1882. You straighten your back because the table may tilt and the ghosts may whisper, but nothing fuels a good ghost story like a good petty feud. It turns out that Victorian ghost hunters weren't a single unified group. Far from it. They were a collection of dueling personalities, clashing egos, and dramatically penned rebuttals sent through the post, like spiritual cease and desist letters. Langley pulls out a slim book with a frayed cover, letters concerning the credibility of Miss Agatha Blight. You don't even need to read it. That title alone is a gift. She was a medium, Langley explains, and quite good. Too good, some said. Miss Agatha Blight as the story goes, conducted séances where tambourines floated, voices rang out of empty teacups, and once, a piano played by itself, though someone pointed out later it was a music box under the table. A rival investigator, one Mr. Clifton Ramsley, became obsessed with debunking her. He attended her sessions, took exhaustive notes, and then published anonymously in the Spiritualist Gazette under the pseudonym A Gentleman of Sound Morals. His accusation that Miss Blight used her feet to create all spirit phenomena. The scandal broke like a teacup hurled across a séance table. Langley shows you Ramsley's infamous diagram, a cross-section sketch of Miss Blight's parlor, with exaggerated arrows pointing from her ankles to a bell under the table. The caption reads, "Highly flexible limbs suspected." You laugh. You can't help it. Then Langley flips the page, and now you're staring at her rebuttal. Miss Blight responded with a 42-page open letter titled "To the Cowards Who Hide Behind Pseudonyms and Pretend to Understand the Spirit Realm." In it, she accuses Ramsley of misogyny, poor handwriting, and once falling asleep during a séance like a bored walrus. You're stunned. This was warfare, but with candles and calligraphy. Historians still debate who was right, Blight or Ramsley, but that wasn't the only feud. The 1880s were a battlefield of accusations, of fraudulent mediums, rigged séances, and ghost sightings that were later revealed to be unfortunate reflections in mirrors. Langley pulls another folder. This one holds a printed notice titled 12 Signs Your Medium is a Fraud. You skim it. Too much incense. Curtains always drawn, even on sunny days. Carries bells in a suspiciously large pocket. Insists you not look under the table, for safety reasons. Responds to all questions with vague references to someone named Henry. Claims ectoplasm smells like rosewater, despite obvious scent of wet wool. Becomes faint during questioning. Recovers only after applause. Speaks exclusively in French, even when spirit is confirmed to be Scottish. Refers to spirit voices as internal monologues. Uses ghost fatigue as excuse for errors. Keeps cheesecloth in bonnet. Looks smug when candles flicker. You're wheezing by number 8. Langley merely nods. A very useful checklist. And yet, amidst all the ridicule and finger-pointing, there was something remarkably earnest about these rivalries. Every accusation was an attempt, flawed though it may have been, to protect something sacred, the hope that it was real. If someone faked it, they weren't just cheating an audience, they were cheating grief. Langley shows you his personal copy of a letter written by Sir William Crookes, a respected chemist and member of the Royal Society, defending a medium he had observed under strict conditions. He swore she produced genuine phenomena. Others called him gullible. He didn't care. He believed. Or maybe he just wanted to believe so badly that the belief itself became the point. You note, Session 16, exposure to materials concerning inter-investigator conflict, tone, gossipy, subtext, protectiveness, core issue, authenticity versus comfort. All parties appear sincere, even in contradiction. That's the strange charm of the hoax wars. They weren't just about calling someone a liar. They were about drawing lines around belief, trying to fence off the sacred from the performative, and occasionally they were about egos the size of small dirigibles. Langley adds, of course, some fakes were exposed, but even those sessions, people felt something. You glance again at the letter from Miss Blight. One line stands out. You may accuse my feet of mischief, but you will never understand what my heart witnessed in the dark. Corny? A little, but you copy it into your notebook anyway, because it speaks to something you've felt since the first knock on the table, the yearning behind it all. To believe, to protect belief, to fight over belief, even if the ghosts never show. Miss Ellesmere shuts her own notebook. Fraud, she says, is still a form of faith, just the wobbly kind. Langley smiles, not disagreeing. You look down at your own notes, pages thick with contradiction, and you realize the real séance never ends. Not at the table, not with the lights on. It continues in the debate, in the records, in the petty rivalries and impassioned rebuttals that carry the mystery forward. Ghosts don't just knock, sometimes they argue. The room smells faintly of ink and cooling coals. Langley is now reclining in what he calls his reflection chair, which is really just a slightly lumpier armchair with a dent in the cushion, shaped exactly like him. Miss Ellesmere is reviewing her notes with surgical precision, red pen in hand. You, meanwhile, are absorbing what you've just heard. The drama, the spectacle, the elaborate call-outs of the hoax wars, when Langley leans forward with that now familiar gleam. You've earned it, he says. Time to meet the big leagues. You're not sure what that means until he produces an envelope. It's thick, hand-addressed, and sealed with what looks suspiciously like wax, because of course it is. The flap reads, "The Society for Psychical Research." You've heard the name whispered in earlier sessions, always with reverence and just a touch of theatrical eye roll. Langley opens the envelope with exaggerated care, pulling out a tri-folded document that crackles with age. He lays it flat. At the top, the official letterhead of the SPR, in curling serif font, flanked by two rather judgmental-looking griffins. This, Langley says, is when ghost hunting went respectable. Formed in 1882, yes, the same year the hoax wars were raging, the Society for Psychical Research was Britain's first official organization dedicated to the serious study of paranormal phenomena. They wanted to cut through the raps, the drama, the flying cheesecloth. They sought evidence, controlled studies, peer-reviewed data, and possibly ghosts, but only the well-behaved ones. You scan the founding members, philosophers, physicists, theologians, all very concerned-looking men in cravats. Some of them, like Sir William Barrett and Frederick W.H. Myers, were already known for dabbling in both science and spiritualism. Others had reputations to protect, and perhaps that's why they created a society, a fortress of formality, where they could chase ghosts with dignity. Langley shows you one of their early publications. It's titled Proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, Volume I. It contains papers with names like On Apparitions Occurring During Sleep Paralysis, Tests of Mediumship in Constrained Environments, Notes Toward a Taxonomy of Knock Sequences, An Incident with a Phantom Umbrella, Not Conclusive. You can't tell if it's science, satire, or the beginning of a very strange literary movement, possibly all three, but there's no doubt they took themselves seriously. Historians still argue whether the SPR was a true scientific body or a club for intellectuals trying to justify their fascination with the unknown, but their output, astounding, hundreds of pages, meticulously recorded cases, interviews, surveys, letters from people who swore they'd seen, heard, or smelled something beyond the grave. Langley hands you a page from an 1887 case file. It details the account of a maid who claimed to have seen her deceased employer walking down the hallway 3 weeks after burial. The investigators visited the home, mapped the layout, and even interviewed the gardener, who swore he heard someone humming in the rose garden, the exact tune the mistress used to sing. They didn't prove anything, but they documented everything. You write, Session 17, Introduction to SPR Methods. Notable shift from performative séance toward structured investigation, emphasis on pattern recognition and verifiability. Emotional tone subdued, but urgency palpable. Langley brings out one of his favorite tools, the SPR report form. It's printed on cream paper and includes blanks for date, location, type of phenomenon, number of witnesses, level of fright, suggested natural explanation, if any, mood of the room. You stare at that last one. Mood of the room. Langley nods. A good haunting is 40% lighting and 60% vibe. You scribble that down immediately. Miss Ellesmere, without looking up, murmurs, the SPR also recorded failed séances, many of them, that catches your attention. Langley confirms, oh yes, they documented everything, even the nothing. Sessions where no one knocked, no one whispered, no table wobbled, just 10 people in a room, staring at a wall, hoping the wallpaper would sigh. That was what set them apart. Most ghost hunters focused on the highlights, the dramatic moments, the clattering teacups, the moaning from the cupboard. The SPR wrote about the dead air, the disappointing nights, the séances where the only spirit to appear was boredom. You read a report entry aloud. Session 42. Medium failed to enter trance. Participants awkward. One faint knock, traced to radiator. Session ended with polite applause and tea. And it's beautiful, not because anything happened, but because it didn't. And they recorded it anyway. Because maybe that's what ghost hunting really is. Not chasing evidence, but witnessing the spaces where something might be, and writing it down, just in case. Langley places a SPR membership pin into your palm. Brass, aged, faintly warm. He says, not official of course, but you've earned it. You grin. What's the initiation ceremony? He shrugs. Mostly paperwork and a lifetime of polite skepticism. You accept. You write. Session 17. Content awarded symbolic SPR pin. Mood solemn pride. No phenomena observed. Fire flickered once unclear cause. Tea consumed. Belief not required. Curiosity mandatory. Miss Ellesmere adds, welcome to the club. Langley raises a brow. She's never said that to anyone. You sit back, notebook full, room still. The society may not have solved the mystery, but they gave it structure. They turned ghost hunting into a discipline, one that required rigor, humility, and a remarkable tolerance for disappointment. You look down at the SPR motto, scribbled on the final page of the report. We record what we cannot prove, in case someone, someday can, and that's enough. The SPR pin is still warm in your palm, and the room around you seems quieter than it should be, as if even the shadows have paused to adjust their monocles in approval. You tuck the pin away in your notebook, like a medal earned not for courage exactly, but for curiosity. Langley is pleased. Miss Ellesmere, possibly, too, though she expresses it by blowing softly on her ink to dry it faster. You think you've seen it all now. Langley raises a finger. Time, he announces, for the field trip. You blink. At this hour, he gestures to the window. We're already there. You hadn't noticed before, but through the tall, slightly fogged panes, You can just make out the gabled roof of an old inn across the cobbled courtyard. A sign hangs askew, "The Wren's Rest." Langley taps a file folder on the table. Documented hauntings, 5. Active séances, 3. Possibly haunted stairwell, 1. And the most unimpressed night manager in London. Miss Ellesmere snaps her notebook shut. He refuses to dust the mirror on the third floor, claims it hisses. You're already reaching for your coat. The walk is brief, the air cold and damp and thick, with that peculiar London fog that smells faintly of coal smoke, mist, and untold stories. The Wren's Rest creaks as you enter. The foyer is narrow, the wallpaper aged and slightly blistered. A faint smell of varnish and gin-soaked carpet greets you. You pass the night manager, who's half asleep behind the front desk, reading a book titled 10 Polite Ways to Deny a Ghost Exists. Langley nods a quiet good evening. You're led up a flight of stairs, very old, very loud. Each step sounds like it's mourning something. On the second landing, Langley stops. "This is where we work," he says. "Ghost hunting with lodging." You're standing outside a modest guest room, room 4. The door frame is warped. The knob is loose. It couldn't be more perfect. Langley unlocks it with a brass key and steps inside. The room is just large enough for a bed, a desk, and a wardrobe with a mirror that absolutely does not reflect light the way it should. Miss Ellesmere lights a candle. "We've documented 16 events in this room," she says. You glance around. It doesn't feel haunted. It feels quiet, which is worse. Langley opens the file. "Let's go through the list," he says, flipping pages. Whispers heard near wardrobe, midnight, 1893. Bed frame shuddered on 3 separate occasions. Witness, Mr. Algernon Poole, age 54. Mirror fogs from inside, even when room is cold. Candle extinguished without wind. Multiple reports. Unidentified humming, always off key. Langley lays out his tools again. Notebook, pencil, bell, thermometer, feather. You've grown fond of the feather. You take your seat near the wardrobe. The candle dims. Langley begins the observation. Temperature steady, flame upright, mirror not fogged. You jot it down, and then the humming starts. Faint, unsteady, not music exactly, more like breath trying to be music. Miss Ellesmere nods. Langley whispers, "Event 17. You freeze. It's not frightening, just strange, like the room itself is remembering a song it never finished. You scribble. Session 18. Sound manifested. Direction unclear. Volume low. Tone mournful. Possibly human. Possibly plumbing." Langley smiles faintly. "Every night it does this, but only when someone new is present." Miss Ellesmere adds, "It stopped for a full year when Langley got sick. Started again the night he came back. The humming continues for precisely 2 minutes. Then silence. No fanfare. No chills. Just silence." Langley checks his watch. 12:07. That's consistent. He adds the entry to the Wren's Rest logbook, right below a note about a prior guest who claimed the mirror reflected a woman, despite standing alone in the room while bald. You wander to the mirror. It's tall, cloudy, warped at the edges. You look in. You see yourself, mostly, but behind you, just over your left shoulder, nothing, just a shadow, a trick of the glass. You don't write that part down. You just return to your notebook and add field session in room 4. Auditory anomaly observed. No visible movement. Mirror strange, but inconclusive. Overall mood, hushed, anticipatory, not unwelcoming. Langley nods. The ghosts here don't perform. They linger. That you realize might be the most authentic haunting of all. Not screaming, not levitating tables. Just a room that remembers too much, and a mirror that never quite forgets your outline. You pack up your tools, your notebook, your pencil, your newfound instinct to look twice at dark corners. Langley extinguishes the candle. Miss Ellesmere opens the door, and you leave the Wren's Rest a little differently than you entered. Not because you saw a ghost, but because you wrote one down. You're back at the house now. Langley stokes the fire with the reverence of a man lighting an altar, while Miss Ellesmere is already settled back at her desk, pen in hand, as if the walk never happened. Outside, the fog clings to the windows like a ghost who's not ready to leave. You settle into your seat, notebook open once again. You've heard the knocks. You've listened to the whispers. You've measured feathers, sniffed sulfur, and stared into a mirror that reflected slightly too much silence. But now, Langley says, it's time to investigate one of the most peculiar séances he's ever recorded. He leans forward, voice dropping. It happened in a widow's basement, Mayfair, 1895. The way he says, widow's basement, makes it sound like a chapter in a Gothic novel that had to be banned for being too emotionally damp. You begin to write the heading, Session 19, The Widow's Basement Séance. Langley opens a leather binder, larger than the rest. Inside are yellowing pages, tied with faded blue ribbon. He unties it slowly, as if worried the pages might sigh. The widow, he begins, was named Mrs. Cressida Bell. Her husband died in a fire. She never remarried, never left the house, actually, but she held weekly séances, quiet ones. Just her, 2 friends, and her dog. The dog rarely participated. You don't interrupt. You wouldn't dare. The basement was cramped, low ceiling, one window, always covered. She insisted the spirits could only enter from below. Miss Ellesmere adds without looking up, she meant that metaphorically. Probably. Langley turns the first page. Session 7, he reads. The candle flickered. The dog barked. No one spoke. There was a smell of oranges. You're instantly charmed, because what you're hearing isn't some grand paranormal event. It's a story so small, so quietly strange, it feels real. Mrs. Bell's séances weren't dramatic. There were no floating trumpets, no shouted declarations from the beyond, just small signs, a breath of cold air, the shifting of a shadow, the occasional bowl of water that rippled without reason. Langley reads more. Session 12. No one spoke. The knock came from the coal bin. We asked no questions. Mrs. Bell said he wasn't ready. Langley shrugs. She never said, but she always set a chair for him. A chill creeps up your arms, not from fear, but from the intimacy of it. These weren't theatrical ghost hunts. They were acts of private grief, performed in quiet, repetitive rituals. You write séance, characterized by restraint. Silence treated as evidence. Participants maintained presence without demand. Unspoken name, possibly central to session meaning. There's a drawing in the logbook, a charcoal sketch of the basement, 3 chairs, 1 candle, a dog curled beneath the table, and in the corner, a small cupboard, slightly ajar. You flip the page. Langley has a note attached in his own handwriting. Session 19. Candle extinguished with no draft. Cupboard door opened 4 inches. Dog did not bark. Mrs. Bell smiled. Said he's listening now. That's all. No explosion of lights. No apparition. Just a quiet gesture, noted and preserved. Historians still debate whether Mrs. Bell was deluded, quietly clever, or simply a woman who found comfort in order. But her logbook is one of the most complete séance records ever discovered. Every session documented, every chair placement sketched, every silence dated and signed. Langley closes the binder with care. These are my favorites, he says softly. No fuss, no showmanship, just time spent with someone who's missing someone. You glance at Miss Ellesmere. She's watching you now. Sometimes the best hauntings are the ones where the ghost never says a word, she says. You jot that down. Then you add, Session 19 evokes rare emotional clarity. Spirit, not as performer, but as guest. Medium, not as speaker, but as listener. Séance structured like a dinner invitation to absence. Langley smiles. Beautifully said. You realize something else. Mrs. Bell's logbook isn't just a record of possible hauntings. It's a diary of remembrance. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was trying to make space for something she wasn't ready to let go. You close your notebook gently. In that moment, surrounded by fading firelight and pages full of flickers and knocks and cold drafts that may or may not have happened, it all feels so human. The widow's basement séance wasn't about conjuring. It was about keeping company. Langley has gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that begs for attention, but the kind that sinks deep into the floorboards and invites you to do the same. The fire has burned down to an orange puddle. Miss Ellesmere has turned to a fresh page, but for the first time tonight, her pen rests still beside it. You know something different is coming. And then Langley murmurs, as if sharing a bedtime secret. We had a visitor once, a proper celebrity. He lets the silence stretch long enough for you to lean in. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You blink. That's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? Langley nods. He came here, sat in that very chair, insisted on being referred to simply as Arthur, though no one really managed to do it. Miss Ellesmere whispers. He called Langley's mustache suspicious. Still stings. You nearly drop your pencil. Conan Doyle, the man who created Sherlock Holmes, the most rational detective in all of literature, was, in his personal life, an ardent spiritualist. He believed in mediums. He attended séances and wrote books on the afterlife. Historians still argue whether he was earnest or simply grieving. His belief in spiritualism deepened after the death of his son, Kingsley, during World War I, and from that moment on, he needed the spirit world to be real. Langley produces a photograph. There he is, Sir Arthur, leaning slightly forward in a dimly lit séance room, hands folded, eyes closed. On the table beside him, a bell, a candle, and an open notebook. He brought his own pen, Langley adds. Gold-nibbed. Far too fancy. You're handed a copy of the notes he took that night. The handwriting is bold, tidy, full of the same confidence that Sherlock used to dismantle an alibi. But the content, it's quietly emotional. One entry reads, "A presence in the room. No proof offered, but I felt it nonetheless. That is sufficient." You pause. It's strange. reading the words of the man who created the most hyper-logical mind in fiction, admitting that feeling something is enough. Langley opens his own journal to that same night. He'd written, Sir Arthur responded calmly to each knock, asked polite questions, and said afterward that the quiet was more powerful than any trumpet or table lift. He shook my hand before leaving and thanked me for the stillness. You scribble your own note. Session 20. Notable guest. Literary credibility meets spiritual yearning. Observation. Belief becomes softer, more private, in the presence of grief. Miss Ellesmere, uncharacteristically sentimental, adds, just listening. Langley nods. He said silence never felt empty in that room. You take a moment to absorb that, because this wasn't a séance for spectacle. It wasn't a test. There were no floating handkerchiefs, no sudden cold spots, no dramatic pronouncements from beyond. Just a man, grieving, sitting in a room with others, hoping the absence of sound might finally speak back. And perhaps, in its own way, it did. Langley pulls out a letter from Sir Arthur, written a week after that session. Dear Mr. Langley, though I cannot say what truly occurred that evening, I left your home feeling steadier. There are truths beyond the visible, and sometimes they knock quietly, requiring no proof at all. Thank you for keeping the door ajar. It's signed with a flourish. Arthur C. Doyle. You feel something stir, not fear, not awe, but that tender feeling that comes from being close to someone else's sincerity. Langley leans back. He returned once more. Didn't ask for a séance. Just wanted to sit. I brewed tea. We said nothing for over an hour. Miss Ellesmere adds. He brought a newspaper clipping about a man who saw a ghost in his garden and said, This one's better than most. Then he folded it up and didn't speak again. You smile. There's something gently absurd about that, and also completely perfect. Because sometimes ghost hunting isn't about ghosts at all. Sometimes it's about permission to believe, to grieve, to sit in silence and feel like the absence isn't empty. You write your final line for the night. Even the man who invented reason found comfort in the unexplained. And that, more than anything, justifies the candle, the notebook, and the long shared silence. Langley rises slowly. The fire is nearly out. Miss Ellesmere closes her journal with a soft click. And you don't feel the need to speak, because in this room, sometimes silence is the story. The house is nearly silent now. Langley clears the last of the teacups. Miss Ellesmere stands, stretches, and dims the oil lamp to a soft amber glow. Your notebook is growing heavy in your lap, not from its weight, but from its sheer accumulation of moments. And yet, Langley smiles as if you've only just begun. We've reached the rules, he says. And rules, my friend, are where things get truly absurd. You look up, curious. He gestures dramatically. Behold, the dark room protocol. Miss Ellesmere produces a folder thicker than some encyclopedias. On the cover, DRP scrawled in blocky, slightly irritated lettering. The dark room protocol wasn't invented overnight. It evolved, a Frankenstein's monster of etiquette, paranoia, and serious attempts at structure, all designed to answer one eternal question. How do you stop the medium from cheating when you can't see a thing? Langley opens to the first page. General requirements. You read aloud. No natural light, no matches, No lamps, no glowing buttons, no bioluminescent sea creatures. You blink. Was that last one a joke? Miss Ellesmere raises an eyebrow. A very specific incident in Brighton. Best not ask. The rules were often comically specific. You skim further. Participants must wear soft-soled shoes. All furniture must be measured. Hands must remain visible or clasped with neighbors. The medium must be searched for loose items, bells or egg whites. You write, Session 21, Structured Paranoia, rules intended to ensure honesty, ironically fostered suspicion, darkness weaponized as both proof and disguise. Historians still debate whether the darkroom protocol was helpful or performative. Some claim it made séances more credible. Others argue it turned them into elaborate stage plays in which no one could see the actors or the strings. Langley flips to acceptable spirit interaction times. There were time blocks. Apparently, ghosts were allowed a window between 9:10 and 10 p.m. After that, it was considered rude, or a sign the medium needed sleep. You burst out laughing. Langley shrugs. Ghosts are punctual, or at least the people writing about them are. There were also debates about music. One rule states, no harmoniums unless previously approved. Participants may hum gently, but must not attempt to summon spirits via solo performance, unless discussed with the group. Another reads, if a tambourine begins to shake on its own, the nearest participant must ask, is that you, Henry? Henry, apparently, was a widely popular default ghost name. Langley continues, in 1897, a medium named Eleanor Markham refused to follow the DRP. She claimed the protocol offended the spirits, called it bureaucracy in the beyond. She was banned. Immediately, Miss Ellesmere adds, and then invited back a year later, because her séances were just too good. The irony, the stricter the rules became, the more the belief leaked around them. Because while people wanted order, they also wanted magic. The more rules you made, the more the supernatural had to slip through cracks to feel real. You add a note, tension between control and chaos. Darkroom protocol as a ghost hunting paradox, structure built to invite unstructured events. Then you come across a list titled, Frequently Broken Rules, Medium Touches Trumpet, Someone Opens Their Eyes, a candle mysteriously relit, argument over whether someone burped or was possessed. Participant brings contraband cheesecloth. Spirit appears before designated knocking time. Langley says, you can imagine how tense that got. You can. You see it now. 15 people in a pitch-black room, hands clasped, knees touching, a tambourine on a string swaying in the air, and everyone trying very hard not to accuse Mrs. Fairfax of hiding a magnet in her corset. This wasn't science, not entirely, but it wasn't theater either. It was a ritual, a structure built from the desire to witness something real, but just controlled enough that belief could survive disappointment. Langley closes the protocol binder with a soft thud. They weren't foolish, he says. They were hopeful. Miss Ellesmere whispers, hope wears rules like a coat. It still shivers underneath. You look back at the binder. Darkroom protocol, a comedy of manners for the invisible. A safety net beneath the belief that maybe, just maybe, someone's still knocking. Langley is chuckling quietly to himself. Miss Ellesmere is sketching something in the margin of her notebook, possibly a tambourine with fangs. The fire has gone low again. now glowing like the bottom of a lantern left too long in the fog. The darkroom protocol binder has returned to its shelf, but the mood it leaves behind still lingers. Do you know? Langley says softly. The Victorians once tried to build a machine to record a ghost's voice. You raise an eyebrow. Of course they did. He stands and reaches behind a stack of books, retrieving a dusty case with brass clasps. When he opens it, you're greeted by a contraption that looks like a phonograph lost a bar fight with a clock. This, he says, is the ectophonic recorder. It hums faintly, like something half alive. It was invented, if that's the right word, by a spiritualist inventor named Aldous Wynne Taylor, sometime in the 1890s. His theory that spirits spoke in frequencies too low for the human ear, but capturable by sensitive diaphragms, copper wire, and an unhealthy level of optimism. Langley flicks a switch. Nothing happens, of course, but that's the point. The Victorians didn't build ghost machines to succeed. They built them to feel like someone was trying. You write, Session 22. Mechanical attempts at spirit capture. Sound as the new séance frontier. Machines mimicking belief, not proving it. Historians still argue whether Wynne Taylor was serious or slyly mocking the whole enterprise. He never published full schematics, and the only remaining device, this one, is either a priceless relic or a coffee grinder in disguise. Langley plays a wax cylinder recorded with the machine. What you hear is odd, a low hiss, a warble, then a series of faint pops, like someone chewing bubble wrap underwater. Wynne Taylor claimed it was his sister saying, "I forgive you," Langley murmurs. Miss Ellesmere nods. Others said it sounded more like, "I'm full of glue." You grin. But the truth is, you can hear something. Not a voice. Not exactly. But enough of a suggestion that if you were grieving, if you were desperate, you might hear forgiveness, or warning, or simply presence. You write, ambiguity key to function. Machine did not clarify belief. It curated it. Langley sets the device down, and then Miss Ellesmere surprises you. We tried our own version, she says. Last year. You blink. You built a ghost recorder? She shrugs. You shrugs. A sort of spirit dictaphone. Ran on D batteries and T-induced confidence. Langley pulls out a small device, jury-rigged, from an old tape recorder and what looks like a copper whisk. He presses play. This time, there's silence. Then, a click, a pause, then, a creak. It could be anything. A floorboard, a distant chair, a mistake. But Langley smiles like it's treasure. You don't laugh, because by now, you understand. These machines aren't trying to prove ghosts exist. They're trying to give form to longing. If you can record it, then maybe you're not imagining it. Maybe grief has a frequency. Maybe memory can be rewound. Maybe silence can be archived. You jot one final note. Ghost machines are mirrors. They offer back not what was heard, but what was needed. In the clicks and hisses, comfort, not confirmation. Langley closes the recorder's case. We never caught a ghost, he says, but we caught time. And that's what all of it feels like now. The candles, the notebooks, the darkened rooms, not tools to catch phantoms, but nets to hold moments, fragile, flickering, easily dismissed, but they're all the same. The machine rests quietly on the table, and even though it says nothing now, part of you still listens. Langley doesn't speak for a while. The room feels paused, like even the fire knows to hold its breath. You sit there, tape recorder, still faintly humming, the idea of capturing echoes still buzzing in your ears. And then Miss Ellesmere stands, quietly. She doesn't make announcements. doesn't gesture dramatically like Langley tends to. She simply pulls a bundle of paper from a locked drawer, places it in front of you, and says, "These are the unsolved ones." You look down. The folder is labeled residual cases in neat, unshowy cursive. Not flashy, not dramatic, just lingering. You open it. Inside, yellowed forms, faded sketches, time-stamped notes, cases that didn't close, not because of lack of interest, but because they simply refused to end. Events that trailed off rather than finished. Apparitions that appeared once and never again. Feelings that persisted, stubborn and unexplained. Langley leans in. These are the ones that keep you up at night, not out of fear, but from sheer incompletion. You begin reading. One file details a woman who reported smelling lilacs in her basement every Wednesday at exactly 4 p.m. for 6 years. Nothing else ever happened. No sounds, no shapes, just lilacs. Always lilacs. Another describes a series of pencil sketches found weekly on a stairwell in a derelict boarding house. No artist ever discovered. No witnesses. Just soft charcoal drawings of closed doors. Then there's the Clockman file. A retired railway worker claimed that at precisely 2:13 a.m. every night, he'd hear the sound of a watch chain dragging across his dresser. Not a ghost, he insisted. Just someone checking the time. A polite presence, never disruptive, always punctual. You write, Session 23. Exploration of residual cases. Phenomena lacking narrative arc, but rich in atmospheric detail. Ghosts as repetition, not performance. These weren't events, they were patterns, and the Victorians noticed. Langley shows you a clipping from an 1894 journal article titled, "On Ghosts Without Message or Meaning." The author, anonymous, of course, argued that not all hauntings were communicative. Some were merely leftovers, emotional sediment, worn grooves in the fabric of space, like footprints in soft carpet. Miss Ellesmere says, after someone's long gone, you find one case particularly chilling, not because of fear, but because of its gentleness. A man living alone wrote in to describe a presence that sat at the end of his bed, not nightly, just when he felt overwhelmed. He never saw it, never heard it, but on difficult days, when things felt impossible, he'd feel a soft weight near his ankles and wake up with a little more strength. He named it Hollow. No séances, no questions, just company. Langley taps the page. We never figured that one out, he says. But then again, we didn't need to. You jot, these cases resist resolution. They ask nothing, offer no climax. Instead, they provide something rarer, a low, ambient presence that outlasts explanation. Historians still debate the purpose of tracking such non-events. Many dismiss them as coincidence, psychological projection, or attention-seeking, but the SPR logged them anyway. They believed that silence meant something, that stillness had texture, that a ghost might not always knock or scream or tug your sleeve, but might simply remain out of frame, in the walls, behind the memory. You sit with that for a while. Langley closes the file. These are the hauntings we never resolved, but they taught us the most, and you believe him, because these residual cases remind you that ghosts might not come to teach something. They might exist because something, grief, love, fear, refuses to fade entirely. Like the scent of lilacs, like a soft drawing left on a stair, like a presence that never leaves the bed. You finish your entry with one final line. Not all spirits are visitors. Some are echoes too soft to go away. By now, you filled almost an entire notebook. The pages fan out like old leaves, ink stained, smudged, oddly precious. Your hand aches a little, but you don't stop, because Langley hasn't. He opens the drawer beside him and takes out one last file. This one's smaller, thinner, titled only Ellesmere. You glance at Miss Ellesmere, who doesn't flinch. She folds her arms. It's not dramatic, she says, but it's mine. You wait. Langley lays the folder open like it's an offering. Inside is a single page of notes, one sketch, and a dried flower pressed between vellum sheets. Not all mediums made noise, Langley says. Some faded away. You glance at the sketch. A woman standing in a parlor, hair pinned high, eyes closed, arms raised, not in rapture, but in surrender. No wind. This was Margaret Ellesmere, Langley explains. Distant relative, a medium for a few years in the 1870s. Mostly private sittings. She refused to perform in public. Miss Ellesmere adds, she said ghosts didn't like being scheduled. You're already writing. Session 24. Disappearance of a private medium. Not fraud, not fame, just fading. Margaret was known for her soft approach. No wraps, no floating furniture, just presence. Her sessions were almost boring, Langley admits, but people left them feeling lighter somehow. The notes speak of her offering tea, of humming during sittings, of simply holding space. She never claimed to hear the dead, Langley says, only to remember them more clearly when they were near. And then one day, she stopped. No scandal, no accusation, just a note left on a chair. They no longer need me. She moved away. No forwarding address. Left behind only that drawing and the flower, a pressed viola, found tucked into her final journal entry. Miss Ellesmere speaks quietly. That's why I do this. You turn to her. She meets your gaze. Because she wasn't trying to prove anything. She just hosted memory, like laying a place at the table, just in case. You jot medium as host, not conduit, goal not contact, but comfort. When memory becomes less lonely, the medium's work is done. Historians still argue whether Margaret Ellesmere was ever a true medium. She didn't produce ectoplasm. She never joined the SPR. Her journals were thin on phenomena, thick with poetry, but maybe that was the point. Langley hands you one final quote from her letters. I do not speak for the dead. I only hold the silence gently, so others might listen. You stare at it for a long time, because by now, it all makes sense. The candles, the note-taking, the insistence on darkness, the strange tools, the fussy rules, the hums, the knocks, the soft chairs pulled from dusty corners of basements. It wasn't about ghosts, really. It was about inviting absence, sitting with it, listening to it, writing it down so it felt a little less invisible. Margaret Ellesmere disappeared, not because the work failed, but because it worked, and when she was no longer needed, she went quietly, just like a good ghost. The notebook is full now. Your pencil is worn to a stub, the fire's down to embers. Langley hasn't spoken in a while, and Miss Ellesmere, well, she's no longer writing, just sitting, listening to the creaks in the walls, like old friends murmuring from behind the plaster. You feel it in your bones. This is the last page. Langley reaches for one final item. A box. It's small, Cedar. Smells faintly of lavender and old ink. He places it in front of you with more ceremony than he's given anything else all night. Inside, a stack of calling cards, each one printed with a name, a date, a time, and a location. Parlor, drawing room, library, cellar. Some have been marked with pencil, a faint X. Others are faded entirely. These, Langley says, are the guests who never arrived. You raise an eyebrow. For the séances, he explains. These were the ones expected. Invitations sent, seats reserved. But the spirits never came. Miss Ellesmere chimes in softly. They're our favorite kind. You hold one card up. It reads, Mr. Reginald Ashcroft, Saturday, 10:30, drawing room. In the corner, a small pressed fingerprint, human or otherwise, impossible to tell. You begin to write session 25, the no-shows, ghosts that decline the invitation, emptiness noted and still documented. These are the failures, the evenings where nothing happened, no knock, no cold spot, just a circle of hands growing warm with boredom, just the medium sighing, just a room that stayed a room. Langley opens his own journal, volume Z-Us, and flips to a page marked with a red ribbon. June 11th, wind outside, quiet inside. Candle behaved. Trumpet refused to move. Participants waited 90 minutes. Spirits may have been occupied. That's it. No apology, no embellishment, just an honest account of absence. And somehow, that makes it more haunting. Historians still debate whether these silent séances were true evidence or evidence of delusion, but the SPR logged them anyway, carefully, because even silence, recorded with intention, means something. Langley points at another card. Madame Duvet once insisted the spirits were sulking. Miss Ellesmere adds, one medium claimed a ghost missed their séance because they were attending a different one in Bristol. You laugh and write. Final entry notes. Ghosts as unpredictable guests. Silence treated not as void, but as delay. Faith persists in face of nothingness. You glance back at the card for Mr. Ashcroft. No spirit ever came, but Langley still logs the date, the attempt, the stillness, and you realize this is the core of it. Not the ectoplasm, not the whistles, not the flickering gaslights, or the belled trumpets, or even the tambourines strung from rafters, but the showing up, even when nothing does. You tuck the card back in the cedar box. Langley closes the lid, and in that soft click, something settles, not finality, but acceptance. Ghost hunting, Victorian style, wasn't always about chasing shadows. Sometimes it was about keeping the seat open, writing the name down anyway, waiting with dignity, and knowing that even if no one knocked back, you still listened well. You press your notebook shut for the last time. Langley looks over. You did well, he says. Miss Ellesmere nods, just once. And that's all you need, because tonight you didn't catch a ghost. You caught the culture of waiting, the art of believing politely, the long, slow theater of maybe. And in its own quiet way, it was beautiful. The fire's nothing more than a soft orange pulse now, ticking like a slow heartbeat behind the grate. The house, old as it is, has fallen into the kind of silence that doesn't need to be earned. It just arrives, naturally, like fog curling beneath a doorframe, like breath fogging a forgotten mirror. Langley has gone upstairs. Miss Ellesmere has returned to her corner, one lamp left on low, sketching something faint you'll probably never see. And you're still here. Notebook full, head full, not with answers, but with a very specific kind of wonder, the kind that leaves space for silence, for absence. For maybe the ghosts you heard about tonight, they weren't loud, they weren't violent, they weren't here to scare you awake. They were memories, echoes, motes of longing suspended in candlelight, guests that sometimes forgot to arrive, but always had a chair waiting anyway. And maybe that's all any of us ever need. So now, as you lie back, pillow soft, breath slow, let the quiet wrap around you like the velvet walls of an old séance room. Let the creaks of your house remind you that every place remembers. Let the stillness hold your thoughts gently. You've listened well tonight, and whether or not the spirits knock back, they've heard you too. Sleep easy.